right, at 5:08 p.m., I'm going to call this meeting of the Mountain View Wisdom School Board to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will now take roll call.
Ellen Wheeler,
Laura Blakely,
Chris James,
Laura Ramirez-Berman,
Devin Conley. Let the record reflect that all of the trustees are present this evening. And we will now move on to the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
so moved.
Thank you. A second?
second.
Thank you.
I have a question. Do we
yes,
need
ma'am.
to modify the consent
When we
agenda
get
now?
to the
When we
get to the consent agenda. Yep. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the agenda has been approved unanimously. All right. And we will now move on to the consent agenda. And as Trustee Blakely started to mention, I wanted to note that the consent agenda tonight will need to be amended to include 2 updated school accountability report cards. The Huff SARC and the Landell SARC both had some data incorrections. One was about the state reporting and one was a typo. So those have been fixed in the formatting and included and will be in the updated consent agenda.
And Board President Conley, I'd like to make a quick comment after the consent agenda is approved, if that's all right with you.
Sure. If there are members of the public who would like to address the board regarding the consent agenda, you can raise your hand using the hand function, the raise hand function in Zoom. If you click on the participants tab at the bottom of your screen, it will pop out a sidebar. There are 3 small dots at the bottom of the sidebar, and you can click on those 3 small dots and click raise hand. Or if you're on a phone, you can use *9. And Dr. Rudolph, before I go too far, do you want to add about translation?
Yep. Spanish interpretation is available for this meeting. If you're using Mac or PC, click on the globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're on an iPhone or Android, it is in the options menu. Hay interpretación en español disponible para esta reunión. Si está usado una Mac o una PC, haga clic en el globo en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom. Si está en iPhone o Android, está en el menú de opciones.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. It does not look like we have any public comment on the amended consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as amended.
Thank
Second.
you. Is there a second? Trustee Chang. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. On a motion moved by Trustee Blakely and seconded by Trustee Chang, the amended consent agenda was approved. Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a special shout out or thank you to the 2 community members who submitted application for the Parcel Tax Committee. So they are Brett, I don't know how you pronounce his name, Lemoyne, and Patrick Neshlaba. And I'd particularly like to thank Patrick Neshlaba for jumping right back in to volunteer for our community after running for school board and not succeeding.
Hear, hear.
Yes, thank you. All right, we will now move on to item 3, communications. Are there any representatives of employee organizations who would like to address the board at this time? Okay, seeing as there are none, we will move on to district committees. Are there any representatives of district committees who would like to address the board at this time? Seeing as there are none, we will move on to the superintendent's update.
Just real quick, I want to remind everybody that tomorrow we do have a community check-in. So We've been touching base with different stakeholders about this particular topic, reopening, which comes up next. But we do have a community check-in where you can, if you have additional questions, it will be fielded. I'm also, something else will come out for me a little bit later on in terms of more information, and over the course of the next week, you'll get more information piece by piece, just talking about some of the topics we've had today, and especially explaining some of the changes that we now have. And if we're allowed to go back to hybrid for reopening, it'll talk about what those changes look like.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. We will now move on to item 4, community comments. This is the time reserved for community members to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board and administration welcome this opportunity to listen. However, in compliance with the Brown Act, the board is not permitted to take action on any non-agenda items. If you would like to address the board at this hand, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom by clicking on the participants tab at the bottom of your screen. It will pop out a sidebar. You can click on the 3 dots and it will give you the option to raise your hand. If you are on a phone, you can press *9. I'm going to wait about 20 seconds for hands to be raised. And then based on the number of commenters that we have, I will allocate time. And Dr. Rudolph, do we have
I just
any
want to
written-
point out I have one comment also that was
written
emailed
comment.
in. So
Okay.
I can read that one first before we go.
Okay, all right. So at this time, we have 3 hands raised. We are going to cut off the raise hands now. And we have 4 commenters total because we have allocated usually 10 minutes for this item. We will do 2 minutes each. And Dr. Rudolph will start with the written comment, and then we will go with our speakers.
All right. 1 second here. Okay. This comment comes from Carrie Fox. Dear trustees, thank you for so much for your deliberations on the many factors involved in securing our campus. Mount Enrollment is a campus that is unsecure from the public, even more with removal of much of the original fencing in the last construction. By retaining the friendly atmosphere of the neighborhood school, the safety of our students is the highest priority. I began working at Mount Enrollment in 2000 as a YMCA site director and as a teacher in 2002. During these years, we have faced the terrifying reminders of many mass shootings, followed by lockdown drills, active shooter drills, run and hide defend trainings, and much talk about how to keep our students safe. I cannot count the number of times I have spoken to members of the public about the boundaries of our campus and escorted them off campus during recess and PE activities. The most extreme example being the need for police involvement when a particular man continued to visit campus during recess with his hands in his pants despite confrontations and the very clear directions from multiple staff members. We've had multiple situations where we've locked down due to police activity in the area, one memorable incident when an electrical transformer explosion sounded like a gunfire and sent us into lockdown until the situation was determined safe. In each of these situations, the lack of perimeter controls made our efforts theoretically futile due to the fact there is nothing to deter public from accessing the doors and the windows of our classrooms from multiple directions. The Kinder SDC wing, while opening onto a beautiful park, is particularly vulnerable. It has never been within the campus security fencing. Kindergartners and our SDC students are sometimes prone to elopement, and without any major visual or physical boundaries, our low fence gates do not lock. We have daily situations that compromise the safety of our most high-need kids. As an educator who's worked in schools in Chicago, Connecticut, and Wisconsin, and having traveled the country, Mount Enrollment's campus is decidedly unsecure. Plans for perimeter fencing are thoughtfully drafted, reasonable, and needed. The provisions for unlocking gates and public access to the park after school hours and on weekends accommodate the neighborhood and provide for public use. Perimeter controls are imperative for the safety of our students, and time is now.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. All right, the first person that I have for public comment spoken is listed simply as Michael. Michael, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I grew up in West Berlin during the time of the Berlin Wall. And for those who are unfamiliar, West Berlin was essentially an island surrounded by East Germany. My relatives all lived in West Germany, and we had to cross the wall and drive through East Germany to visit them. And we were constantly checked and monitored during our travel. I myself lived close to the wall in the south of Berlin. And once the wall came down, I'll never forget how much green space opened up right next to where we used to be cooped up. I felt like I lived in a different universe. I can't tell you how much the barrier split our family and the effect that it had on those who lived within them and for those who live outside of them. Our parks are a place that keeps the community bonded to the schools and with each other, especially now during the time of COVID, when we have so little contact with each other. The park has become even more critical to keep us connected with each other. I have a toddler and a dog, and we really rely on this outlet multiple times a day. I hope the trustees and the district consider the effects that fences will have on the surrounding community and the bonds that will be weakened between the district and the community once those go up. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next, I have Mr. Zorski. You may unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, trustees. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear
Okay,
you.
very good. February 25th will be the first day of the Mount Loma Park Working Group. I'd like to personally thank Drs. Rudolph and Westover and the district for taking the time to attempt to bring the fencing issue to an amicable solution. Still, I'm saddened that many in our community have already given up on this process before it has began. And while I understand their reasons, I'm still saddened. Some have decided not to participate in the process because they feel the results are preordained, and others fear the scorn of the community because they think that if these meetings come to naught, that they will be personally blamed. I see this as a shame, as I know several people who've decided not to participate because that would have been an asset to the working group, and they would have helped pull this community together. Still, I would say that it is in everyone's best interest that we be cautiously optimistic going forward. We need each other. Great schools thrive within a strong community, and a strong community needs great schools. I would hope that both parties can put this past behind us, start listening to each other better, and that we can get on with what is really important in our school system. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Zorski. And we will move on to our last public comment at this time. Sheila, you may unmute yourself.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the trustees for this opportunity to speak. I'm a little nervous. I'm not much of a public speaker, but here I go. I understand the need for school security. We all do. I mean, this has been an ongoing problem in this country for far too long. I like to say that as a senior, I use the park on a daily basis, multiple times, typically by myself and with my granddaughter. We both enjoy it very much. And COVID, I realize, has really amplified the need for the use of the park. But if it wasn't for COVID, I'd still be using the park the same as I am right now. It's a very, very important resource for the residents. I've noticed that south of the train tracks by Central, there's a dearth of parks. While north, there are quite a few parks, and we really need to have our open space, whatever there is here. It's very, very important to us. I'd like to just say that I hope everybody can work together. I really appreciate the fact that you have a group of residents who will be giving their input, and I hope they can find a solution that will meet the needs of the school and the residents as well. There has to be a solution to give the security to the school that the students, the administration, the teachers deserve and need, while being able to maintain the open space for the residents of the Monte Loma area and others who also come and enjoy these wonderful facilities. Again, I thank you very much for the opportunity and for your time, and just please stay safe.
Thank you very much, Sheila. All right, that is the end of public comment. And Dr. Rudolph, I just wanted to clarify, the working group does begin on February 24th, 25th, the Mauna Loma Working Group, they will be coming back periodically to present to the board?
There's a cadence for them to provide feedback, yes.
Okay, thank you. We will now move on to item 5, review and action. And we are going to start with the adoption of resolution number 01012121 for determination that the solar projects at public school campuses and district administration are exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, approving the projects and directing the filing of a notice of exemption. I believe we have a presentation from our Chief Business Officer, Dr. Westover.
Good evening. No presentation this evening, just a quick description. This is very similar to a resolution you passed a couple of meetings ago. This is for our solar project. There are a limited number of relatively small structures that will be put in for our solar project. So adopting this resolution would direct staff to move forward and apply for the exemption for Sequa.
Thank you, Dr. Westover. Are there any questions from trustees? I'm sorry, I see a hand raised by Robin. We have finished community comments at this time for non-agendized items. Are there questions from trustees? Does not appear so. Thank you. All right, we will now take public comment on the solar project Sequa waiver. If you would like to comment on the solar panels, now is the time to raise your hand. Thank you. I see Robin's hand pop back up. And if you would like to comment via Zoom, you can click on the participants button at the bottom of your screen. Pops out a sidebar. There are 3 small dots. If you click on those, it will give you the option to raise your hand. If you're on a phone, you can press *9. We appear to have 2 comments. So we will allocate 3 minutes each since we have 10 minutes set aside usually for comments. We will start with Robin.
Hi there. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Yeah, I would like to register my concerns about this exemption. Basically, that the project doesn't seem adequately described. Specifically, it's not clear where exactly the solar panels will be installed, will be sited, and why, and what the impact might have, what the impact might be on existing and future public access. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Now we will move to Bill Lambert. You may unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. My name is Bill Lambert. I'm a resident of the Mauna Loma neighborhood. I request that the board not approve the Sequa waiver for the proposed solar installations. The Sequa waiver requires that there be an adequate project description in order for the public and the decision makers to understand the various environmental impacts of the proposed solar installations on the school district campuses. The solar projects are not adequately described in the presentation and in the supporting materials provided by the district. Specifically, it is not clear exactly where the solar installations will be sited, and therefore it is not possible to assess the impact the solar installations will have on existing and future public access and use of the parks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Trustees, are there comments? Yes, Trustee Chang.
This may inspired by the public comments. Do we have any information, Dr. Westover, about the placement? So the speakers from the Monte Loma community, I know with the Stevenson, there was concern about the solar panels. Does that reduce place base? And I imagine that those who are interested on other issues like perimeter are seeing the solar panel have impact on that. So any information we can provide?
Sure. So a few weeks ago, we came before the board with the schematic designs for solar. So in that presentation, it laid out all of the diagrams of exactly where the solar panels were going. And I also have Jason Cave, who is our construction manager, if we have specific questions with us today. But yes, we have specific diagrams that were taken to the board.
Trustee, oh, sorry, Trustee Chang, are you finished?
Okay, just following up with that, on the diagrams, it's hard to kind of be on ground level to know, like, operationally, does it kind of change how kids play on that space? So do we anticipate that, like, will there be a need to expand kind of playground space to kind of adjust around the structure?
That was definitely something we took into consideration when we were designing with NG, looking at blacktop space for the kids, looking at shading, trying to balance all of the needs, the different needs of the school sites. So kids can still play in areas underneath the solar canopies.
Trustee Blakely.
Thank you. I'm just looking at what was in the package because I had assumed, made the connection that the exemption was related to the plans that we had previously reviewed. But have we consulted with legal counsel to see whether that needs to be incorporated in this package? I see on page 196, the notice of exemption appendix E, it says project location specific, and it says see attachment 1. And I don't believe attachment 1, unless I'm missing something here, was in the board package. And so I'm just wondering if it's technically, one of the commenters I know is an attorney who may be much more familiar with Sequa than I am. I just want to make sure that we are not running afoul of the law by not having included those materials in this package. And maybe Mr. Cave is familiar with that. If not, I'm wondering whether it would make sense we have a board retreat in one more week. If we could do this at the very beginning of the board retreat and include it then, and if that wouldn't slow down the timeline.
Our legal counsel actually prepared this document for us, but I can bring it back to him. I'm sorry, Jason, do you want to jump in on the timing piece?
Yeah, I was going to say, Trustee Blakely, to answer the first piece of that question. Typically, the Sequa, it's a procedural step, and it lists the location is the site. So it's the school site. It's Stevenson, Mauna Loma, et cetera. It doesn't necessarily normally get into, solar is going to be at this specific location here, because it's more general, because down the road, as we're going through design, structures could shift a little bit to miss utilities and whatnot. So it's a little bit more general, whereas the schematic design that went to the board a couple months ago now is more specific to location and elevations, so you can see heights and location of the structure.
So from a legal perspective, just as long as we list the site in your, I mean, you do this all the time for many clients.
Typically what you see with the notice of exemption, which is what this is the site reference. It's okay. Normally you don't have site plans and specific layouts included. Okay.
The ones that I'm recalling were like the Crittenden Fields, and I mean those packages were dense, but there was a lot in there.
And those were either environmental impact reports or mitigated negative declarations. They weren't notices of exemption. So yes, absolutely, those are a lot more detailed than a notice of exemption would be.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there other comments from trustees? I would just like to add, we have discussed the actual placement of the solar panels at Mauna Loma in detail in the past. This has been before the board for over 2 years now. And, but I do agree that in the future, it would be, I think helpful for the public when things like this come up, if we could include that prior presentation from a previous board meeting, so that if somebody wasn't at that board meeting, they could see exactly where things were planned to be placed.
And just one more question. When on the notice of exemption, Appendix E, where it says see attachment 1, is that the resolution then, or what is that attachment?
I would have to look into that a bit further. I think attachment 1 is just referring to the notice of exemption form itself.
So attachment 1 is a list of schools and addresses.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that, Dr. Westover.
Hi, attachment 1 is a list of our schools and addresses.
Okay.
And I'm noticing it was not uploaded along with the board packet.
And what is the timing of this? Would it mess things up significantly from a timeline perspective if we revisited it and included the attachment in 1 week? Would that be possible, or is that going to foul things up?
What I would suggest is that the board has the ability to deny it if you don't feel comfortable with it. It's an up and down vote. You know, we've done these a lot previously, but if you're not comfortable with it and you vote it down, then we'll have to bring it back at another board meeting, and that's just the process that it happens. So because it sounds like to me there's a couple of you who may not be comfortable with it. So it seems, you know, just my recommendation to you would just be to just call a vote and go from there, and then we can readjust afterwards.
Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, and another method to do this is to just pull the item and, you know, not vote against it, but just pull the item and then schedule it for the meeting that Trustee Blakely is talking about.
You've already approved the agenda with this on there without it being pulled.
Yeah, we would have had to pull it earlier. Could I make a motion that is different than the recommended motion? Yes, you can vote to table it. You can vote to, you know, deny it, or you can vote to approve it. All those are well within your reasons. It probably won't, you know, without knowing what the full agenda looks like and what the scope is, and considering that we spent a lot more time on this than what we originally allotted, it probably will go into a regular board meeting, not a special board meeting. All right, do I have a motion from any trustees?
I'm concerned about litigation, and so I would move that we table this motion to have it be resubmitted at a very soon, at a board meeting coming very soon, with the attachment included.
Second.
Okay, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, on a motion moved by Trustee Blakely and seconded by Trustee Wheeler, the board voted unanimously to table this item for a soon future board meeting with all of the attachments included. Thank you, trustees. We will now move on to item B, the schematic design review for the Huff Elementary School portable project. And this is also Dr. Westover.
All right, we have a short presentation for you. All right, with me, I also have Jason Cave, who is our construction manager, as well as Arlene Siam, who is the principal of Huff. All right. So today we'll be looking at the schematic design review for the Huff Elementary School portable project. So this is the placement of one new portable, and the portable will have all of the same finishes that the rest of our school portables have, and to match what we currently have at all of our school sites. Arlene, did you want to talk through about the placement a little bit and why the school site prefers this space?
Sure. So when we started looking at the location of the portables, and we've noticed that, you know, with our increase of numbers of students, having portables in the field was going to make it more difficult for us, for the kids to play, especially now during COVID. So we wanted to remove anything from the field, and we looked at all the different areas, and we came up with right next to room 19, which is away from the field, and it allows, you know, an area for the kids to still be able to play, and it's in a safe area as well.
Thank you. This is looking at the floor plan and exterior elevations. So very similar to the portables we currently have. This is our design budget. So this is an update from when we brought the overall budget for Measure T to you. This is the schedule. Notice that we'll be working mainly during the summer. And questions or comments?
Thank you, Dr. Westover. Are there questions from trustees? Trustee Blakely.
Just a quick question. Is the portables that it's next to, is that the kids' place or are those classrooms currently?
Their classroom, it will be right next to the kinder classroom.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Berman.
I was just curious if these would be, what, I'm assuming this would be a classroom for students, upper grade or lower grade? Just curious.
It would, right now, it looks like it's going to be either K2 STEAM or another kinder classroom.
Is there, just wondering if there's a bathroom in there for kindergarten?
Good question. Rebecca?
There's no bathroom. These were intended to be kind of overflow portables, not necessarily intended for kinder.
Are there for Trustee Chang?
When it's done being built, what is the anticipated site capacity for Huff when it's done?
I would need to look that up, but all of our schools can handle at minimum 450 students. Plus we have the additional portables. So the portables are typically used for flex space, not to house actual classrooms. So if we were to fill to max capacity, it would be well over 450 at Huff.
Are there further questions from trustees? Okay, we will go to public comment on this item. If you are a member of the public and you would like to comment on this item, you can raise your hand in Zoom using the raise hand function. You click on participants at the bottom of your window. It pops out a sidebar. The sidebar has 3 small dots at the bottom, and if you click on those dots, it will give you the option to raise your hand. If you are calling on a phone, you can also press *9. We do not appear to have public comment on this item. Are there trustee comments? Trustee Chang.
The report clearly shows the justification for this portable. I would say that it would be interesting for the board to begin to hear when we later on we're going to get a report in the school reopening that has the student enrollment numbers for different schools, and when we talk about expanding capacity at one site because it's currently at Huff at 469 students, and then we have schools with 100 less students who are under enrollment. So I just think that this kind of brings up something that we as a board maybe need to look at in the future about boundaries and things like that, because we're building at one place that has too many kids, and then we have other places that don't have enough kids.
Are there further comments from trustees? Trustee Blakely.
I would just point out that the prior board had visited this on numerous occasions, and the measure, their bond measure T, I'm getting my measures confused, but the bond that the voters approved last March specifically designated that there would be an additional portable at Huff, and then several, like a new wing of classes at Landals. And that was based on all of the development projections from the city and applications. This was all for development that was already in the pipeline. And that is consistent with our goal of preserving neighborhood schools. So while we recognize that there is some space at some of the schools in other parts of the city, we wanted the people that live, we wanted students to be able to attend their neighborhood school. So that was the rationale for this particular portable. But I'm sure, as plans and development proposals and all change over time, we will be revisiting that. But for now, that was the rationale here. And as far as I understand, that was all for development that was already in the pipeline and underway, so it's needed now.
Sorry, I just want to point out that on October 19th, the last time we did capacity and talked about growth, Huff's capacity was at 572. They had existing enrollment on October 19th, 2019 of 546. And so they had a surplus of 26 seats, which is why this is being added there. And this addresses the Measure T and the board's direction for adjusting for short-term growth as one of the immediate priorities.
Thank Thank you, Dr. Rudolph and Vice President Blakely. Are there further comments from trustees, or is there a motion?
I move that, go ahead, Trustee
No, you
Blakely.
go ahead. You please.
Okay, I move that we approve the schematic design, budget, and schedule presented for Huff Elementary School portable project as presented.
Second.
Okay. On a motion made by Trustee Wheeler and Trustee Blakely, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, on that motion made by Trustee Wheeler and seconded by Trustee Blakely, the school portable project was approved unanimously. We will now move on to item 6A, the Return to Learn reopening. I would like to welcome the many people who have joined us, I anticipate, for this item. We will now have a presentation from Dr. Rudolph.
All right, give me 1 second. Just a departure from what we normally do. Normally, we do not take questions until the very end. However, because of the length of the presentation, it makes sense that you ask questions as the presentation is going on. All staff has been made co-hosts, I believe, in order for them to answer questions as we go through this process.
And
So
I'll just note, trustees, jump in, because with the presentation up, I cannot see everyone's hands. So if you do have a question, please ask it.
So I have a question, Superintendent Rudolph, when you said if you have questions during the presentation, who is you that you're referring to? Is it the trustees or the entire
trustees have
community?
questions, yes.
Okay.
Trustees.
Can we also highlight all of the questions that have been submitted ahead of time? I will go ahead and highlight all of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. So all of the trustees had an opportunity to submit questions. So for all of those of you at home, if you go to our agenda on our website, you will also see the Q&As there, which we may not ask during this presentation.
All right, we ready to go?
Yep.
All right, and then just real quick, Shelley, if you could go ahead and reclaim host, and also start letting people in, because once I get started, I won't be able to focus on it.
Will do.
Thank you. But you'll have to make me co-host, I guess, something like that. All right, so we're going to touch base on a lot of different items here. So I just want to remind everybody that this presentation was actually 2 presentations that have been merged together, and they both were 2 lengthy presentations on well within their own rights. And so this marries all the data presentations that we had around October, and then it also couples conversations about reopening across the board. So, you know, it's quick and easy. We've had a lot of different meetings across the board, and we continue to have them in terms of our community check-ins. That's been one of the blessings of having COVID, that we've had a lot more engagement. But there are 4 principles that we continue to look at. The first one is that we want to keep employees and students safe. We want to make sure that we're nimble to provide instruction for any of the 4 stages. We also want to create high quality, equitable learning environments for all students, and we want to involve our community in solutions and planning. Our goals today is to examine the data to determine next steps, explain what reopening looks like, and also to gather more feedback from the community. So starting off, and I brought this up back in April, but I want to talk about it. There are 4 dimensions that we want to look at, 4 key questions across the board: public health risk, criticality for economic development, impact for student learning and thriving, and our ability to safeguard schools. When we think about that, it is a continuum. So if our risk for children and teachers themselves, as well as asymptomatic transmission, is limited through children is considered limited, then schools should be among the first sectors to reopen. However, if reopening the schools can pose a significant risk to both children and others, then it becomes one of the last ones. And so we will judge this at the end of the presentation to look at sort of where do we fall across the levels of risk. But before we get started, originally we had some recommendations for what possible times or dates that we would look at. But last week, the California Department of Public Health came out with a new criteria, eliminating the waiver process altogether, and simply says schools serving students in K through 6 may not reopen for in-person instruction in counties with an adjusted CR rate above 25 cases per 100,000 population per day. This is a variable number. So as of the printing of this presentation, Santa Clara County's adjusted CR is 40.4 per 100K. I believe as of today, it's around 38. However, the case rate did increase in Santa Clara County. And I just want to remind people, so almost all entities are now testing their employees at a higher rate, and that is also what's helping to drive the adjusted case rate down. So for instance, we went from testing our employees every other month to now testing them every other week. And so that is helping, that is part of what readjusts the CR. If we are in the red, orange, and yellow tiers, schools may reopen at all grades. 7th and 8th grade may not reopen under the purple tier. And for, even though we have support pods, because we have not opened a grade level, we cannot reopen any school. It has to be one grade level at a school in order to continue reopening. So we only have support pods, which do not classify across the board. So there are multiple dimensions that we said and that we talked about before: health and safety, student engagement, instructional time, which we're not really going to talk about, but we will look at it in terms of engagement, curriculum in line, professional development, learning loss, assessment, teacher roles, special needs, SEL, and family engagement. We have divided these into multiple metrics, and I will go over each metric through this presentation. So the first one is obviously the COVID data, and so where we are. This is an old slide, but it's important to understand that in June, we were at close to 4,000 cases. Since then, and of course, as a result of the number of cases and sort of the readjustments, we are now, I believe we've actually crossed the 80,000 threshold, and with 815 deaths. So we clearly have had a spike. As you can see, and this comes as no surprise to anyone, that when we originally thought we were in dire straits, was nowhere close to where we would end up. COVID still is impacting Latinos and African Americans at a disproportionate rate across the nation. But what we are seeing now is that the number of Asians who serve as a percent of deaths has sort of increased also. At the same time, one of the good things about this, and I would say this is in large part to the work that we have. Originally, when we had these slides up, we talked about, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 70% of the cases were sort of unknown. They've now since changed the metric and just simply saying deaths by underlying health conditions instead of showing where the case rate is. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that what the county is now doing is moving away from saying specifically where people are getting COVID from because of where it's such widespread, but instead simply focusing on what is causing mortality. This is very important to think about. Oftentimes we get compared to our peers and school districts that are open. I'm not sure if you can see the cursor as I move it, but if you look at the center of Mountain View, right where the dot is, what you will see is that we are a darker blue than Los Altos, as well as Palo Alto. And for the most part, all of Mountain View is some gradation of blue, a darker color, which means that our case rate in Mountain View is higher than Palo Alto, It is higher than Los Altos Hills, and is higher than parts of Sunnyvale, which is also part of the consideration that we have. Again, this is on the 5th. What we saw was that we were at 47.9 cases per 100K with an adjusted case rate of 32.9. We then, the next week, which is the week of this publication, it went up to 58.8, and the adjusted case rate went to 40.4. It has since dropped down to around 30, somewhere in the 30s. I don't have the exact number, and I believe the new case rate is about 68 per 100K. So it is a constant moving ball. We do report out, similar to all other entities, the number of cases. This is on our website, our dashboard. We have had 19 staff that are positive. We have had 5 students that have tested positive. In the week of this publication, we had a new case that tested positive, and we have had 50 staff members quarantined, 38 students quarantined. And unfortunately, we at least know of 1 parent death in our community for students students in our district. So this is really, as when I met with our employee relations board, which is comprised of our union leadership, what they brought up is like, it is now starting to hit home that we all know someone who has been impacted by COVID in some type of fashion. So, but we do want to compare our numbers to our peers. And so I want to remind everybody, this is cumulative numbers, and this is also Los Altos School District, LASD, and PAUSD, Palo Alto, are actually open for elementary students. Mountain View is closed. We do report out our quarantined. And so these numbers reflect our support pods as well as other staff members, but no other district is reporting out the number of students and staff that are quarantined. And so it is hard to compare us that way. But what is a little concerning is just the number of staff members that have tested positive. Even though Mountain View is darker than Los Altos and Palo Alto and parts of Sunnyvale, I just want to remind everybody that our staff members travel from multiple counties across the board. I believe that we have 5 different counties that we represent. And so that creates a logistical issue for us, because each county has different case rates, and especially if you're in Santa Clara County, you're coming from the southern part of the county, the concern is a lot greater there.
Dr. Rudolph, before
Yes.
we move on from this section, so I was looking at our dashboard, and it's now updated with 21 staff members who have tested positive. Have you heard anything at the county or state level this week? I know it's relatively new, but the variant 452R, there is some discussion about whether or not it is it's transmitted at a higher rate than the prior version of coronavirus that we have had. Have you heard anything about that from the county yet?
They have not talked about this yet at all. I have a phone call later on today, or not today. I have a phone call later this week with the county. I do know that Dr. Fauci feels pretty confident that the vaccine will deter this new variation, but I'm assuming that in our next in our next call, we'll get more information from Dr. Cody.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to metric 2, which is distant learning. Clever is our portal. So what we're looking at here is just how many kids are actually logging in by school. This is just by the number of users across the board. Just a reminder, Graham has more students than any other school. So you should expect to see a larger amount of logins at Graham than any other one. So this is pretty reflective of the populations at each site. But we measure attendance and we measure student engagement. And so at first glance, it is easy for us to immediately go to what the lowest and the highest bars are. But I do want to point out that if you look across the line, what you will see is that our attendance at any given time is at its lowest, 95%, and at its highest, close to 99%, which means that students, and this is judged by our students actually logging on to Zoom. And so for context, for the most part, all of our schools average somewhere in the neighborhood of about 96 and 97%. And so this is pretty reflective of where we are. And I'll talk about what that means in a little bit. What we do notice is that Vargas and Mistral have seen steady increases over the course of the year. 5 schools have experienced some sizable drops in student attendance, but again, I want to couch that as we're talking about a percentage point or 2, and 3 schools have remained stable since the start of the school year. Next, we'll look at student engagement. So this again is rated by teachers in terms of whether or not students get 2 scores. And this came out in a presentation that was earlier this year in September. So teachers also rate students in terms of their involvement. Kudos to our teachers in TK. Across the board, what you see is increased involvement from our TK students, who are students who are ineligible because of their age to be in kinder at the time. Kinder is our lowest group. But again, I want to say we're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of about 95, 96% daily average attendance. And I do want to point out that we did at the beginning of this suggest that if a parent needs to take their kid off of a break, that it was okay for them to do that. So I would suspect that some of these dips are also about parents making intentional decisions just not to have their kid there. 6th grade has been the highest across the board. So kudos to our middle schools and our 6th graders for being engaged. They have the highest rating. And obviously we have some work to do with our 7th and 8th graders. Now we're going to break this down even further for engagement based off of levels of English proficiency. What we do notice is that our students who are reclassified, our RFEP students, actually have some of the highest attendance rates or engagement rates amongst all of our students. And that is pretty consistent with what the research says in terms of student performance. When a student reclassifies, they do succeed at higher rates. Our IFEP or initially reclassified students are right up there with our IFEPs, and they tend to be the second. Our English only are pretty consistent. All of them are above, for the most part, with exception of 1 school, are close to 97.5%. But there is a difference between the level of engagement of EL students and their peers, with 2 schools hovering around 95% for the English language learners. We're going to break this down even further and look at Latino versus non-Latino students. And so this trend is pretty is pretty relative. We know that most of our EL students are Latino. And so what we see when we saw the graphic that says that EL students are not engaging at the same level, what we're seeing here is the exact same thing. Our non-Latino students are actually engaging at higher levels, over 97.5% compared to their Latino peers, who are all, again, still above 95%. Socioeconomically disadvantaged versus non-socioeconomically disadvantaged. Again, there are some differences at each particular site, but what we see are students who are SED are not engaging at the same level that their non-SED peers are. But, you know, and this is the first time we see a metric drop below 95%. And each site is trying to understand what's taking place. In some cases, SED numbers, so I'll use Stevenson, their SED numbers are extremely low. And so when a kid misses a class, it has a bigger impact than what it would at a school like Graham that has a higher number of SED students. And so that's just a little context there. But obviously 92.5 is the low, close to 92.5 is the lowest that we have. I know that Principal Santiago is already thinking about strategies across the board. Kudos to Ms. Straw and their team, SED and non-SED across the board has been pretty consistent. Both are hovering at exactly the same. And so there's some, I know this was a board question that was submitted. There are definitely some lessons to be learned that principals can share in the next LT meeting. Now we're going to look at special ed versus non-special ed. So this is where Stevenson and Therakoff, Huff and Graham are really shining. All of them are pretty close in terms of the percentage of engagement. You know, again, this is the second time we've seen a drop below 95% at Castro. We are working to see what is taking place over there. But this is, you know, this is one of those areas that we sort of expected that our special education students are not engaging at the same level of their non-special ed peers, with the exception of at Stevenson, which is just slightly above. And so, you know, I've already hit this. Obviously, special education students and socioeconomic disadvantaged students are below the 95%, and both sites are working on and looking into the issue about how they can address those. So when we think about preschool, all of our students, and normally we don't talk about preschool data as much, but I think it's important to also talk about how is it affecting our youngest kids. All of our students at preschool have received iPads as well as Square Panda home play sets, which help with language acquisition. I'll be talking about that data a little bit later. They've also had backpacks and tools, and they have kits. And what is interesting is attendance and participation. We've actually seen a decrease in absences during distance learning. It went from 8% to 4.2% during the same time periods. And similar to what we'll see later on, we have seen higher levels of parent engagement with students during this time. Now we want to move into professional learning, which is the next metric. So our professional development has focused on technology tools, enhancing student engagement, using data for student support, bridging learning gaps, academic vocabulary, and supporting ELs, as well as integration for STEM teachers. And then in January 4th, we had a professional development day where we worked on how do we simultaneously broadcast a lesson from a classroom in anticipation for the possibility of having a hybrid setting. And so we have purchased, all of our teachers have both a MacBook as well as an iPad, so that they can use multiple devices for delivery instruction. And then our principals led PD at each one of their sites, principals and coaches led PD at each one of the sites across the board in order to make sure that teachers are able to execute this. And I will say, and we're working on more visuals so that people can understand it. It is very similar to what we're currently doing right now. It is, the only difference is that students are actually in the classroom when we get to that point.
Question?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
On the regarding Edtech, what's the process for teachers or school sites to purchase additional like online subscriptions to use with their kids? Like, is there has there been any like kind of COVID funds that can go to additional blended tools that teacher may in this distance learning find useful that they didn't need before?
Ms. Bauer or Ms. Duggar, would you like to discuss that?
Sure. So, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Kathy. So we haven't set aside money for sites specifically for that COVID funds. Sites do have funds that they can use at their discretion. And usually if they are interested in purchasing something, they either come through us or the technology department more often than not to see if we already have something that fits that need or if it was something that would be good for them to purchase to support their site and their teachers and students.
May I ask a follow-up? Have there been such requests? Have there been any kind of like, whether by individual teachers or or school sites have kind of risen to the district as requests of new tools during this distance learning?
I haven't gotten, if we get requests through our department, it's usually from a site, not from an individual teacher. The main one that I can think of to come to mind was the purchase of Seesaw after our experience last year, just using Google Classroom and needing something that was going to be more beneficial for our younger students.
All right. So we also have Edtech videos. We had our tech at the last meeting. We had our technology team as well as our technology instructional coach talk about the videos that they've had. So we've had a pretty good, pretty sizable amount of people watching the actual videos. These are just the different topics: Chromebook orientations, Clever, Seesaw, on how to use different platforms. And so this is just a number of views across the board. So what this says is our technology team, as well as our technology instructional coach, have been doing an amazing job of pumping out materials so that teachers are aware of how to utilize these particular platforms throughout the year. And they also hold sort of tech drop-in sessions for teachers so that they know exactly what to do, or if they have questions that can be answered. Now we're going to dive into metric 4, which is assessments and learning loss.
Can I just ask a quick question before we jump into that? So from the response to my question, it sounds like district-wide there isn't any SEL or trauma-informed practices that's happening. Are we seeing that professional development happening at school sites and maybe being delivered by teachers or principals?
And I wouldn't have access I'm not privy to know what each particular school has been focused on. I would have to leave that up to either the principals to answer, or maybe Mr. Gar may know.
I can say to that a little bit, that at the beginning of the year, like we put in the board notes, we provided an SEL toolkit or lessons by weeks to our sites, and they use that. And now our wellness coordinator is supporting that with our principals, Ms. Corinne Jimbo, and she's supporting that and providing and working to get resources for our sites. At this time, we do know she has worked with principals a little bit and started the work on it already.
Thank you.
All right. So just the various items that we test for: literally, phonic sounds, writing benchmarks, as well as standards-based curriculum. So let's dive in to look at what our data looks like. So first and foremost, one of the big things that we want to do is see whether or not comparative from year to year, how we are performing. And so what you can see is that there actually hasn't been that sizable of a drop, except for when you get to the middle school, you start to see a little bit of a variance. This also is the first year that we've had all of our kinders assessed. Last year, we only part of the kinders were assessed, but the younger grades are definitely performing around the same exact level. I do want to point out that this is not an apples to apples comparison. There are different numbers of students. Students have matriculated on, and so I don't want you to think that it is the same number of students across the board. This is a totally different amount. We also believe, just looking at the numbers, when you remove kinder, it doesn't skew the results that much, but it does bring it down a little bit closer to the 61%. So the real question here, and this aligns with one of the board goals, is to really look at how students are doing in terms of growth. And so we look at the two different diagnostics, diagnostic 1 to diagnostic 2. And we broke it down based off of the various levels to see what is the percent of students who are on grade level, on or above grade level on diagnostic 1, which is at the start of the year, to diagnostic 2. And what you can see across each one of these metrics or each one of these areas, students are demonstrating growth. ELs are students who've been reclassified, initially reclassified students, students with disability, as well as SED students have all shown growth, and now, of course, our English-only students.
Dr. Rudolph, just to
Yes.
clarify, our diagnostic 1 at the beginning of the school year is usually administered, I don't know, somewhere in September or October when kids have settled in a little bit. And then diagnostic 2, I think, happened in December. So how much time was there between those 2 diagnostics?
Mr. Gar, it's I believe it's a trimester. Mr. Gar, you want to?
Yes, that's right. That's correct. Yes. So the first diagnostic happened in September, between August and September, and then the second diagnostic was in December. So, and there's a third one, which is usually at the end of the year. So it's by trimester.
Thank you.
Okay. But when we compare diagnostic 2 to diagnostic 2 from year to year, again, what we actually are seeing is growth. For our EL students are actually performing this year, are performing better. There are more students who are on our grade above grade level. Does not mean that we're satisfied with 20%, but it does mean that we're seeing growth. And I'll talk about growth a little bit more. The same can be said for all of our other groups. That we are seeing growth. And I think that is a testament to the hard work of our teachers, our staff, our librarians, as well as parents to make this work, that we're seeing so much growth across the board. And you'll see a better representation in a second. So these are the students who have moved into tier 1. So these are the percent of students who are at or above grade level from diagnostic 1, which is a dark green, to diagnostic 2. And what you see across the board at every single site is you are noticing that students are growing in reading from diagnostic 1 to diagnostic 2. What we also look at is how many students are approaching grade level. So this is what we call our tier 2 kids. And you want to see one of 2 things in this particular chart. You would like to see either students moving upwards, and so that means that you're going to see the second diagnostic drop, or you want to see it increase. And I'm going to explain why you want to see it increase in a second. The reason why you would like to see it drop or increase is because it's telling you one of 2 things. If it is dropping and the next slide is dropping, that means that more students are entering into or approaching grade level or on grade level. If you are seeing an increase, similar to what we see at Mistral, but you are seeing a drop on the next slide, that means that more students are moving closer to grade level, and you are seeing a subsequent drop on the next slide. So let me give you a good example real quick. Let's look at Stevenson. Stevenson has 76% of its students on grade level. It had a 9% jump over the course of the year. To the second one, now you look at this at the number of students who are in tier 2, and what you see is an 8% drop in the number of students who are coming close to grade level. So it went down from 19 to 11. But then when you look at the last slide, you see the trend is that the 4% of students who were below 2 or more grade levels below has actually dropped too, which suggests that more kids are moving into tier 1. Now I want to, there we go. Now I want to just point this out, similar for Mistral. So again, Mistral, you saw a 2 percentage point increase. Then you see a 2 percentage point increase in terms of the number of students. But what you see is a 3 percentage point drop across the board from the students who are 2 grade levels behind. And so that, seeing the trend, the negative trend in the percent of students who are 2 or more grade levels below, is exactly what we would like to see. So essentially, what did we see? 41% of our students went up from tier 2 to tier 1. 93 sort of stayed at the status quo. And then obviously we had some regression where 7% went down from tier 1 to tier 2. So that's definitely an area of concern. But so what does this really tell us when we look at growth? What we see is across the board, the percentage of students who have had an improved placement in reading. And so what you can see is, for instance, I'm going to highlight, there are a couple of schools, Bob, Landals, Huff, as well as Vargas and Stevenson, who have all had 45 to 46, almost 50% of their students. And there's a couple other ones that are real close. What the data does show, though, and again, I caution everyone in terms of comparing these two, because you're really talking about two different sets of students. But what you do see is that if I'm a student at Landals, last year, 57% of students actually improved their placement as opposed to 45. So what can we theorize by this? It doesn't mean that our distance learning approach is bad. It just means that our students, who are doing an amazing job with the circumstances that they have, are better served when they're in front of our students, but it doesn't mean that distance learning is actually hurting them. And now we're going to do the exact same thing for math. So when we look at math, again, we look at the percent of students who are on. And so we're comparing it again from on grade level 19 to 20. And what you're seeing, and again, remember that kinder was not tested at the same level as it was before, but what you are seeing are increases somewhat across the board. Our grade levels are staying the same. There have been some drops, and I do know that Ms. DeGars and Ms. Bauer are also looking to expand the Yup tutoring program into elementary schools to help support students in those grade levels. And for those who do not know, Yup is a company that we've contracted out, which allows 24/7 tutoring for students in math. So now let's break down from diagnostic 1 to diagnostic 2 to see what is are we actually seeing growth? Because again, we don't want to compare students from what occurred last year to this year. And remember that last year also were students who were in person versus students who have been full remote throughout the year. But what you see again is that there are definite increases across the board for all of our students, special ed, SED, as well as our EL. And then if we compare diagnostic 2 to diagnostic 2 from year to year, and again, these are loose comparisons, what you see is that we're pretty much holding the ground for all of our students. And our EL students are being served in terms of improving their performance from one year to the next. So now let's again look at the growth data. Again, what we are seeing is across the board growth from diagnostic 1 to diagnostic 2, with all of our school sites experiencing some type of growth, and meaning that the percent of students who are at or above grade level as of the second diagnostic test. Again, as I stated before, what you want to see on this graph is 1 or 2 trends. You either want to see the numbers dropping or you want to see an increase. And I do want to highlight that Castro has increased the number of students who are now approaching grade level from 39% to 45%. And they also saw an increase in the percent of students who improved or who are on or above grade levels from 10 to 14%. And what we definitely want to see, and kudos to all of our schools, Graham should actually be the same in terms of flat, but just want to highlight that Castro, who had more than half of their students who were 2 or more grade levels below, have now moved up into tier 2 or tier 1, which is really positive information, and it is a positive trend that we want to see. And so what we have here is just, again, this is just talking about improvement. We had 2% of all students go up from tier 3 to tier 1. We had 27% of our students who moved from tier 3 to tier 2,
and 37% of our students went up from tier 2 to tier 1. Again, just looking at growth, and we'll look at Landals again because I talked about the school. So 33% of students improved math placement. It is not where it was last year when students were in front of teachers, but what it does suggest is that even with all the circumstances and all the complexities of distance learning, our teachers, our staff, our librarians, our instructional coaches, our principals are doing an amazing job of making the best of this circumstance and still meeting the board's goal of assuring that students are experiencing some level of growth across the board. And I think that's an excellent thing. And just for reminder, so when we think about Landos, if you think about it for a second, if Landos performs 33% of their students achieve growth every single year, then they'll hit 100% of all their students actually achieving growth, because you're talking about a third of the year. We're often criticized for not sharing math placement data for middle school. So we do want to look at our math pathways for middle school. Again, we do have a tutoring program that also is helping our students. For sixth grade, we do not have a grade level math, and I do want to point out that Math 8, Math 7 are grade level maths, and Math 6.1, 7.1, 8.1, 8.2, any of the points are advanced level classes. But again, what we are seeing across the board is we are seeing increases in terms of the percent of students who are in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Again, we want to talk about preschool data. Earlier, I talked about making sure that we also send out play sets. Thank you to our partner at Square Panda, who have been partnering with us for quite some time now. And what we are excited to see is that our preschool team is doing an amazing job of making sure that our kids are identifying uppercase and lowercase numbers, identifying sounds, counting, and identifying numbers. And I will also point out that this is also in large part to parents being actively involved with their kids too, right? And so that shouldn't be discounted at all. But it definitely says, again, from a data perspective, that while we're not achieving the growth that we could be if we were in person, it does suggest that, the hard work is paying off for our team. And to Ms. Bauer's credit, we have one of the most robust distance learning plans that exist in the county, and it's definitely a model for others. So overall, we're seeing growth across the board. We also are more students are on or above grade level in December 2020 as compared to 2019. All subgroups made improvement from reading from diagnostic 1 to diagnostic 2. And then definitely the percent of students who are improved placement has regressed, which is what we want to see. In terms of math, again, we're seeing growth in all of our students. The same number of students, overall, the same number of students are on or above grade level in year-to-year comparisons. All subgroups, again, have made improvement in math from diagnostic 1 to diagnostic 2. And the percent of students with improved placement has regressed from 1942 to 35. Now we want to look at special populations, which is metric 5. So we have English language students who are being reclassified. We have had 62 students who were actually reclassified, 326 who are being monitored, as well as 32 of our RFF students who are on student support plans based off of their level of engagement. And our current number of English language learners are 888, about 18.4% of students. When we look at special ed, 3.36 of our students have 504s, 11% have IEPs, which is pretty consistent. We have seen 30 initial requests for initial referrals. And in terms of the number of special ed, I know there was a narrative from parents that all of our special ed students are leaving to go to other places. The numbers are actually not that large. 16 students out of all of our special ed students have left either for a charter school, homeschool, or private school. This does not include those who are any students, and we'll see it a little bit later, who have moved out of the area to relocate. And so this is just the special ed student numbers.
Dr. Rudolph,
Now
question
let's look
on
at.
Sure. Sorry, question about the last slide here. Are there particular services or assessments that have been happening in person during this time period?
Yes, we actually started virtual assessments back at the end of September and have almost caught up with all of the ones that have been passed. For services, all services continue to be virtual.
And the assessments have been in person. I know I've seen Director Mays in the district office, as well as other psychologists actually performing some of the assessments. Now we want to move into student supports. Director Chang and his team of SCAS at-risk coordinators have really been focusing, counselors, as well as principals, have really been focusing on the social and emotional supports for students. We have connected with almost 50% of our students across the board since 10/16. We have 128 students total who are in our re-engagements list. I will note that you see the total number of students who are McKinney-Vento is higher than what it was last year. But part of the reason why it says NA in terms of whether they're in re-engagement or active students on their official re-engagement list is because the McKinney-Vento are not singled out. They are actually a part of the school totals. But what we also have noticed is that 166 referrals to CHAC this year. But in terms of what that looks like since 10/16, there have been 52 new referrals. What I do want to point out, and I think this is a large part to our tech team, which I'll be talking about their support in a little bit, or we have 11 students who are in re-engagement and are due to internet issues. Our tech team, as you'll see in a second, or in a couple minutes, has done an amazing job of troubleshooting networks, including troubleshooting devices as well as networks. And so, whereas normally they manage the device on our own network, they have now moved into a place where they are helping people understand how to reconfigure their own networks across the board, including me, who had an internet issue earlier today with my own computer, and it helped me to troubleshoot it. So our tech team has really stepped up to assist us in this manner. So just in terms of the look at the number of technology supports, these numbers are sort of unprecedented. We have more devices floating around at any given time, but what makes it different this year, so we always had sort of a one-to-one environment, but what makes it different is we also have newer devices for all of our students. We have iPads for our preschoolers, but none of these devices are technically functioning within our network. They are functioning, most of them are functioning outside of our network, including our teachers. And so it is troubleshooting these has become a little bit more perilous, but our tech team is really doing an amazing job of staying on top of this. And so this gives you an idea of the amount of work that they have been doing since the beginning of the year. So at the beginning of the year, we had close to 1,250 tech supports. Parents can now have the ability to submit a support ticket directly to our tech team, as opposed to previously they would have to work through the school, which increased the number. And again, I want to remind everybody, this is also the first time we went to a complete one-to-one environment, pre-K all the way up to 8th grade. But what's really amazing is that if you look over the course of all of last year, our tech team averaged a lot more work orders than what we currently have right now. At the end of December, we only had 250 that is third lowest to the summertime when we're barely managing any devices. And so that just is testament to our bus drivers actually help to reconfigure all of these devices, and then our tech team who are supporting so many devices that are not on our particular network. And for the most part, just we do satisfaction surveys. Director Aker has put this in over the last couple of years. So most people are either happy or delighted. There are a couple of people who are just average, but nothing that we're worried about. And again, this is just, we have 5% who are unhappy in terms of the response time to your incident. But for the most part, we have most people who are happy or delighted across the board.
Dr.
We do
Rudolph,
operate support. Yes.
My apologies. The question regarding on the other side, does the tech department, based on kind of their interactions with the community and just with the earlier clever login data, do they have a sense of like how many kids are like still on like moderately not working internet versus is there like what's our sense now? Like, can everybody fully engage in their classes now, or do we? You mentioned there's a few kids who the re-engagement might be because of tech. Do we have a hard number on how many kids are still not fully digitally on board?
Yeah, so 11 are in the re-engagement process as a result of their, so this is across all students. So only 11 that we know that are part of the re-engagement process as a part of it. Does not mean that everybody's internet is as stable or is running at the speeds that they want, but it does mean that there's been a lot of improvement in this area in terms of making sure that we were meeting the needs. I don't know if Director Aker, if you want to chime in a little bit more, or Director Chang.
I was going to say we work with the school facilitators because they know the families more, and so when a facilitator knows of a family that has trouble, they contact us and we help them with their home internet.
A few months ago, the Director Aker had the presentation about the piloting the school internal Wi-Fi. Is that something that still is needed, or has this problem resolved itself?
We're still working on that. We have a pilot CBRS radio that we installed at Castro Mistral, and we're still working out some stability issues with it, and then we're going to get some students piloting it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can't see anybody, so I'm assuming there are no more questions. Okay. So we, the board authorized us to create learning support pods for students who needed assistance. It originally started off with students that we identified based off of the data. Since then, we have opened it up to other students who may have a demonstrated need that is run by our school sites that are the ones who are identifying them. We definitely have more capacity, and we're now into round 4. But as of January 15th, we've had 134 students who are enrolled in our support pods, and I want to say we have the capacity for additional 120 or somewhere around there.
Dr. Rudolph,
Child nutrition, yes.
On the support pods, does how much we spend on this change depending on how many kids enroll? Like, if we are there, like, is money spent on unused seats, or does it not matter that way?
Dr. Westover or Director Chang? So I guess I don't know what's going on with either one of them. And I can't see them, so it's not like I can tell. What I would say is that we have, and you'll see this in a couple of slides when we get to some other data points, we have budgeted the amount, the total amount across the board. And it is well, as we get to the end, we'll be able to have a more finite amount of what we paid out. But the way that our budget system works is that first and second interim are there for us to report what our expenditures are year to date. and to make adjustments to the budget. So right now we just have it budgeted at $1.1 million.
Are you able to hear me?
Can now.
Okay. So we pay per seat, but Dr. Rudolph is correct that we budget based on first interim and second interim based on the total.
Thank you.
Okay. Child nutrition meal counts. We're averaging 20,000 breakfasts and 20,000 lunches in the month of December. These numbers are lower than when we typically have students in school, but it is still a sizable amount of breakfasts and lunches being distributed to students. Just for sort of a point of reference, our highest summer total, which it comprises of a little almost 3 months, is 60,000. And so we're averaging a third of that every single month, which is a true testament to our child nutrition team, who have been staying on top of this and providing lunches across the board. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Finally, metric 7, family and community engagement. So Parent University has really taken off, especially at the beginning of the year, looking at mental health, distance learning resources, supporting reading at home, as well as math at home. I know in some of the community check-ins, as well as some of the board meetings, parents have raved about, especially the last one that's on here, the math one at home. These are also available online for parents to look at asynchronously. But what it says is that parents are engaging. These are some of the highest numbers we've seen for Parent University since its inception. We also are doing more community check-ins. We have continued those since the start of the pandemic. We have one again, like I said, tomorrow. We have cafecitos, as well as other events. And what we do notice is that we are reaching more people by Zoom than what we did with in-person meetings. And this could be one of those lasting legacies of COVID. Since last year, in terms of the number of posts, we have seen an increase in those fans for the district, as well as the number of engagements across the board, which is really good. And again, our fans have been steadily increasing across the board. And so eventually Mountain View Wishman will get their little check mark to show that we're official. So just some initial dots and some other data points. I do want to talk about enrollment real quick. We have seen a drop since the start of the school year, since the pandemic has started. And if you look at the May data, you'll see that we've lost almost, or somewhere in the neighborhood of about 500 kids. However, I don't want you to automatically look at Bub since it's at the top and go, wow, there were 453 students at the start of the year, and now there's 382. What you really need to go to is right around August. And I actually would suggest that we look at the August 31st, because there were so many other variables that were coming into play. So if you take away the people who moved out, and you look at what has occurred since the start of the school year, there hasn't been that sizable of a drop once the school year started. And I do believe that's in part to all the hard work that our team, our teachers, our staff, our librarians, our principals are doing, as well as our parents' faith in the work that we have. But it does mean that we are seeing drops in terms of enrollment as a result of COVID. I just want to remind everybody that we are a basic aid district, and so our funding is based off of property tax value. It is not based off of the average daily attendance or ADA or student enrollment. Just want to highlight this real quick. Meal distribution is still taking place. Free meals are available to all children in Mountain View who are the ages of 18 or younger. We do not require IDs. All schools, with the exception of Stevenson, are available for pickup. Stevenson can be picked up at Therakoff. And then we also have now added multiple meal pickup days at Graham Middle School And then we also distribute meals out to the military base at Moffett, to the military families out at Moffett Field. And I do want to point out that our child nutrition team is doing an amazing job of supporting MVLA as well as LASD in terms of feeding their students too. In terms of CARES funding, we have spent all of this money. CARES came in at $2.9 million. That went to the purchase of PPE, touchless faucets, paper towel dispensers, and soap dispensers. It also went to technology purchases for us to go to a completely one-to-one environment, and hotspots to support those students who do not have it, as well as to enable all of our parking lots with Wi-Fi, and the proof of concept, the CBRS program that Mr. Aker is doing. The federal government, excuse me, federal government is providing money for food, but what they are not providing additional funds for or reimbursement for are the amount of hours that we are putting in order to keep up with the demand. And so we have increased our support to food services as a result. Preschool has also needed additional support in order to continue to function. And then of course we have our learning pod cost, which is at $1.1 million. So I'm gonna caveat these distance learning versus blended learning. This was taken earlier in the year. A lot of parents will probably have a different opinion about this as we get closer to the possibility of reopening. We are planning on resurveying our parents again one final time to see where they are. And part of that is because there have been some sizable changes in what we are going to do. And I'll bring this up in a little bit. But of those at the beginning, at least at the last survey, 47% of our students were requesting distance learning. And since then, 50 parents have since requested new placements. In terms of teachers, we're split right down the middle. Preschool, most in terms of the survey, and again, this is an older survey, express that they have some reservations about returning. Special ed and teachers in TK and Kinder were higher in terms of their percentage points. But for the most part, it's about 50%. 70% of classified staff were comfortable with coming in. We do have what is called the interactive process. It is a chance for employees to bring their concerns about returning and to look at what accommodations we can make. There are employees who do have legitimate health risk. We do not want to put them in harm's way. And so if we were to reopen, we have 36 members who have a medical note. And then in terms of teachers, 4 of them are classified staff. So to bring us to a total of 40. And then we have a number of staff members who do not feel comfortable with returning. I will say again, this is in right around September. I think if we were to resurvey our teachers, we probably would see more individuals who are not comfortable in terms of returning. But the interactive process has been going on all year long. And so this is something totally different than discussing comfort level. One of the things we do want to be mindful of is whether our ability to stay open is possible. And that is predicated on our ability to have subs at any given time. So we have 30 subs that are active and in our pool. And so I know Ms. Victor has been working to hire more subs. One of the issues that we have now run into is the testing has been suspended, so people cannot go in to finish the testing in order for them to become subs. We have some subs who work on Wednesdays to support CSMA classes, and then we have some subs who are not willing to work in a virtual setting, and that is 8, which brings our available daily subs down to 17 at any given time. And so this is where it gets a little tricky because the highest total number of subs that were needed to cover in 1 month was 16, which meant or the total number of subs needed to cover was 16, which meant that in October on one day, we only had one sub who was available to assist. We have now 10 employees who are on long-term absences. And so obviously that is going to impact our availability of having additional subs. And so what that means is we have 7 subs who are available to address the needs of our students at any given time. And what we saw from our neighbors at the end of last school year is that there was a shutdown for Los Altos schools because they did not have enough subs to keep the schools open.
Dr. Rudolph, a question.
Yes.
Do we ever use third-party providers like Sween Education, which is like a sub-provider in Mountain View?
Yep, we were one of the first districts in the area to use Swing. So
is that like emergency? Is that emergency capacity, or how does that go into the numbers?
Ms. Victor, you want to address how I don't know if we would call it emergency, but it's a little bit more complicated, but I'll let her explain.
It is a little bit more complicated this year in particular. We've used Swing in the past primarily for in-person when we have substitutes that we can bring on campus. It is a little bit more complicated when we are in digital learning because of the need for district email addresses to access Zoom and Google Classroom and all. So it's a little bit of a different situation at the moment, but we're working on that as a solution again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay. So now we want to talk about just guidance from the state. I just want, the in-person grant, Governor Newsom's proposal of $2 billion in one-time funds provides a 400 or 337 base grant per ADA, depending on the application date, and is augmented for a grade span adjustment, as well as supplemental and concentration grants. This is subject to legislative approval, and for the most part, as it was reported out a little bit earlier today in some media outlets, if we were to accept the grant funds, those funds would probably be prioritized to make sure that we cover costs for testing of all staff, because we would have to increase the amount of testing. One positive of this is, though, and this was submitted in the questions, that we work, we're currently using El Camino Hospital in order to provide all of our testing. They are doing the exact same thing in Los Altos School District and have increased the number of tests across the board. So they've been meeting what the state requirements are. We're now at a bi-weekly testing rate. And they will have the capacity to hopefully test students. What we've noticed is that there have been some school districts who are not a part of the El Camino Healthcare District. And El Camino Healthcare District does cover any tests that are not a part of, that are not covered by insurance. But some school districts are using a third-party provider to provide tests. In one instance, there are several districts that are now scrambling to find a different provider, which is why the governor is now allowing people to piggyback off of the state's contract, because the CDC determined that their tests would not meet the standards to apply. So that's just something to keep in mind. But we will continue to work as if, both with El Camino Hospital District to continue testing, but also to ramp it up in the event that we do reopen.
Dr. Rudolph.
Yes.
Before we move on to the next slide, that in-person grant. So I attended the County Office of Ed did a workshop yesterday with the Capital Advisors Group on the governor's budget, but also on this in particular. I know there was a February 1st deadline for the initial application, the first round, and because it hasn't been approved by the legislature, it's not even scheduled to be heard by the legislature until after that February 1st deadline. So in essence, it doesn't seem to actually exist yet. And what we were told is that it's going to be dead on arrival, that it's going to get shifted dramatically if it passes at all, and the dates and funding may change. Are you hearing that as well?
Yes, we're hearing exactly the same thing, that there are some concerns about whether or not it will move to the legislative branch fast enough before the end of the year, and B, just whether or not it will actually get approved. And I know that certain superintendents, as well as the unions, are advocating that those funds be used to help with vaccination, as opposed to trying to pay for more testing for staff and incentivizing reopening.
Thank you.
So again, I started the presentation by simply saying that unfortunately, the state changed their guideline last week. We cannot reopen K through 6. Secondary schools 7 through 12 are not allowed to reopen under the purple tier until you hit, they can't reopen under the purple tier at all unless you've already started the reopening process. However, red, orange, and yellow tiers allow schools to reopen at all grades. Just a vaccination update. Our teachers and employees fall in, unless they are in a different group, they're phase 1B tier 1. And so they fall into the sectors of risk of exposure for childcare, emergency services, food, and agricultural. There is no known date for phase 1B tier 1 currently, and they are in the process of developing further direction for healthcare providers and counties. And I do want to point out, and I'm sure Trustee Conley can speak more eloquently on this, is that it is also dependent on which healthcare provider that you're using that determines how fast or when you'll be able to get a vaccination, because each one is at a different stage. So there's some other considerations for reopening. So remember that we said that there are that we have 3 models, A, B, and C. B and C are the ones that we're talking about. So it is, B is the blended version, or the hybrid version, as people know, which means that there are the possibility of you being in class on an A day or B day, or 4 days a week. And then there's a connected version, which means that you are asynchronous. The parameters that we have set, all of our school sites are developing reopening plans. They are one part of the direction that we received based off of feedback and from both from the community and the board, is to make sure that we, to all extent possible, prioritize keeping students with their teachers across the board. And so each site has been empowered to make decisions about how to make sure that it happens. However, there are some guidelines that they have to follow. They have to follow our return to learn plan. They must adhere to the district's MOUs with teachers and staff, Senate Bill 98, as well as 820, and our expectations for instructional quality. Finally, all site plans are required, school plans are required for the county for reopening. And so we delayed the posting of the school plans online because we're going to instead, since the county changed its tiers, but we are going to post it a little bit later, but we want to talk about what distance learning is going to look like, which is a little bit different. And so we, like I said before, at the start of the year, about 92% of all students were accounted for in terms of people participating in our learning options registration surveys. With that said, you have 47 who want distance learning in the red tier, and it drops once you get to orange tier to 29%. 19% of all parents have identified themselves as essential workers, meaning that they would like for a 4-day in-person. And again, as I noted just in the previous slide, that what we clearly heard from everyone is that the disruption to students was not the preferred method, and that most parents would like, to all extent possible, to stay with their current teacher. So what is different, what's changed about our blended process? We are now guaranteeing when we go to the blended hybrid learning as well as the connected version, that we are guaranteeing 4 days of live instruction for both groups, either face-to-face or distance. This is one of the biggest drawbacks that we heard as we started doing the survey. Parents were very clear, why would I choose to go into a blended or connected or blended version, which guarantees me only 2 days of live instruction when I can stay in connected for 4 days. Kudos to our teachers. We came to agreement that we could pull this off if we reopen, and so we're guaranteeing 4 days for all groups. It will be taught simultaneously, and again, we will be providing more concrete examples for you to see. We have some very rough videos that we could show, but I think we're going to get something a little that's more explanatory as opposed to instructional, which is what our principals develop. So students, there will be no, right now our MOU is clear, there are no more than 16 students per class. However, if more than 16 students per class want to come in, then we would have to go to the A-Day, B-Day, but they would not lose the live instruction. One thing to keep in mind, because I think there's a perception that if we were to go to, if a person is to select in-person learning, that teachers, it will look exactly the same. Teachers cannot come in within 6 feet of in-class student. This is per California Department of Public Health guidelines, as well as Santa Clara Department of Public Health and our Return to Learn plan. And so teachers really will be at the front of the classroom. Kids will have breaks. They will be allowed to maintain their pods, and our schools are currently being sectioned off so that different play areas are identified for students. But it is important to know that it is not going to look like the traditional setting that we have until we get past the vaccination point.
Dr. Rudolph, with
Yes.
those, so I know our priority is to maintain the same teacher for a child, but if we have 36 teachers that if we open today, they have medical reasons not to return, what happens to those classrooms?
So principals are aware of who the teachers are that have that are I don't want to say exempt, that have a legitimate medical excuse, and so those teachers will need to teach in a distance learning format. So school sites have been creating plans based off of the preliminary numbers that we have to address those particular needs. Does not mean that everyone is guaranteed to stay with their teacher. It is possible that a grade level could offer to take on all the kids, or it could be that students are moved to a particular teacher as a result of the changes that need to take place to accommodate the students who want to come in.
And just to clarify for the public listening, this does not mean ask your teacher if they are medically at risk and part of that process, because that's certainly not something that we can discuss because it's a private personnel issue, but it's something that would play out if we reopened.
Right. So what I would suggest that a parent does is that there's a couple of avenues when the survey comes out, and I know if look at this as do your kids need to come in, or can your kids function in a distance learning environment? Make that as the decision. I know that the teacher is a driving factor, and you don't want to disrupt your child, but part of the reason why we went to the four days was to assure that all students receive this. You always have the ability to email the principal and let them know that regardless of the outcome, I just want to keep my teacher. And so that would be someone who is comfortable with going into distance learning if that's possible. But it does not mean that can be honored in every single case, because at the end of the day, we do need to accommodate the families who are either essential workers or who need their kids to come in as a result of this.
Dr. I have a question on the 16 student max capacity. Is that driven by the physical restraints of the classroom with the 6 feet of distance between desks, or is that a county requirement?
It is driven by our initial drawings of capacity in order to make a classroom function effectively. I do know that in Wired magazine, they were able to come up with a different scenario if you put a kid right next to a wall, and you could reduce the space that was needed. But this is what we agreed to with our teachers in the MOU, and it is reflective of what we initially thought we could squeeze in to the room. County guidance is also, as well as state guidance, is right around 16, but they are a little bit more coy about how many students you can fit in. So they also say if it's possible for you to get more students in, then that is a possibility that you may explore. But for the most part, the 16 is pretty consistent across the board, unless because all of our classrooms are the same space, unless you have a larger space or classroom that could possibly accommodate more students.
Thank you.
All right. So again, and even preschool will have an at-school option or a connected option. And so this just sort of describes what it looks like. And then again, there are limits that are guided that are guided out of for the preschool regulations in terms of number of students that can actually come in. So earlier, before I talked about understanding the risk and sort of seeing where we are, if we were to look at the public health risk, obviously earlier in this, or a couple weeks ago when we were working on this presentation, what we noticed is that the risk for children themselves was considered moderate. But as we've moved into the purple tier and we've seen a spike, I would now say that there is a significant risk of exposure for both children as well as others, just based off of what our data says. In terms of the criticality for our economic activity, we're sort of split down the middle. Mountain View is fortunate that we have a sizable number of parents who can work from home, and parents have sort of adjusted. Does not mean that that is ideal or that is what the parent wants to do, but we do know that there's a number of parents who work in tech, and companies like Google have stated already that they are going to allow their employees to work remotely for the foreseeable future. So we sort of say that we're right in the middle. It is possible. We do have parents who need it for kids to come in, and then we have some parents who can opt not to have it. The data suggests, just based off of the growth, that blended learning is working for some subjects and grade levels, and in-person level lessons are required for others. We'll continue to work on the support pods. And then in terms of the health and safety measures, we have been and remain a pioneer in terms of the health and safety measures. I have presented extensively across the nation about some of the activities that we've done in our team. We were one of the first districts to get all of our schools up to MERV 13. We have touchless soap dispensers. We have touchless paper towels. Our maintenance team has been working nonstop to make sure that our schools are ready to go. And so that is a really commendable for them, and they continue to work to make sure that they stay on top of it. Reopening will occur in phases. If we are reopening under the purple tier, then we will flip 6th grade and 8th grade and make them into a group 3, because 8th grade and 7th grade cannot reopen under the purple tier. But we would start with our youngest and most sensitive students first, and then we will work our way up to grade levels similar to what our peers have been doing. On our website, what we do have are conditions that must be met in order for us to reopen. This is our dashboard to show you or sort of where our progress is. Okay to launch okay to reopen sites is almost completely done. The district office has already started on this. The waiver process is no longer needed, but if it was needed, then we would put that in. And so this is just a great way for community members to track sort of where we are. to understand what metrics are needed in order to really be effective with reopening. And so it identifies a lot of different metrics. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of work to get this done, but we do need to make sure it's like, for instance, when I was talking about substitutes, we want substitute availability threshold of 10% for daily use. And so we have some work to do there. And then obviously things like revisiting CSMA, rhythm and move schedule, this again highlights the amount of work that is needed, but you can find this metric on our website. And again, you can follow this or bookmark it so that you can sort of see where we are, so that you know where the conditions are. And we'll keep working over the next couple of weeks to keep pushing to make this a reality. So additional considerations. So again, things to take into account. And I just want to be clear, student performance data exists within a vacuum. We cannot compare our results with our peers, but we are pleased with the amount of growth that we are seeing, even if it's not at the same levels of in-person learning. Attendance data suggests that most students are attending and engaging with schoolwork. This is not a proxy for what kids' grades are or anything else. It is just simply to say that teachers are reporting attendance as well as engagement at very high levels. I do want to say that there are diminishing returns for as we get closer to the end of the school year. And if we do reopen, all of us should expect some type of disruption to the learning process, because there will be a reacclimation period that naturally occurs at the start of every school year when we're trying to acclimate students. I know I was talking with Ms. Bauer about how long it takes to train kinders to get them going. She said it takes some time. I was a high school teacher. It took me about a month in order to make sure that the students were right where I wanted, sort of a well-oiled machine within our class, and knew all the routines that took place. And so that just suggests that bringing kids back will have some type of disruption. Doesn't mean it's a bad disruption, but it does mean it is something to keep into account. Our ability to remain open is dependent on staffing, specifically substitutes. Student and staff safety will always remain a priority for us. And so we do need to make sure that students and staff remain vigilant and truthful about reporting. And parents and students will need to adhere to safety guidelines, masks, and volunteering. And I do know that last night, DAC brought back a pretty good comment about the number of pods that parents could be in. And so I will be finding out the answer to that. I also want to point out that the state has not officially stated what they are going to do in terms of testing. That is a requirement. That is something that the Secretary of Education, I'm talking about state testing, that is something through ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, that can only be waived by the Secretary of Education. Unfortunately, Ms. DeVos resigned before the end of the school year, and we're still waiting on confirmation for the Secretary of Education under the Biden administration. And so we're still waiting, and we do not know whether or not we are going to experience testing, but we are preparing as if we are going to test our students later on this year. And that is something that we have to take into account if testing is not waived, and whether or not we need to think about reopening. Does it really make sense to bring kids back in, knowing that we're going to have some type of disruption? The last thing I will say is that on the flip side, if testing is waived, then there is a secondary conversation about, does it make sense for us to reopen and have some kids to come in so they get a feel for what school is like, or so that we can meet the needs of those particular students, specifically our special ed students who would benefit from coming in. I say this to say that we have students, and I'll just use our kinders, who have not stepped foot on campus if they did not go to TK, or if they were not in some type of preschool situation. And so that's a serious concern. And then we have first graders who were only in school for part of the year and who have since who have since come into a routine of not being around their peers. And so all of that's a part of the consideration, but there is sort of a date of no return across the board. And part of that is because, for instance, you have to be in a particular tier for so long, or your numbers have to drop. And then from there, in order for us to reopen, we have a 14-day window that we agreed to, that we have to exercise. And so just to give you a good idea of what that looks like, if next week our numbers were to drop, by the first availability for us to reopen would actually be after winter break, once you count in the 14 days. With that said, we already know that there's been some critics of the school system for not being open. And I'll just simply say, and then there's been some fans or some praise for us focusing on safety. At the end of the day, we're not going to please everyone with our decision. And I'm not expecting to have everyone cheer for the decision either to remain closed or to remain open. Right now, it's been taken out of everybody's hand, and it is really dependent on our ability to wear a mask, wash our hands, and stay away and watch our distance across the board, the 3 W's. So what are the next steps? We will continue community engagement. Like I said before, I have a check-in. We have the 3 focus groups that I will be meeting with. DLAC will have a chance to weigh in. I did bring this up at the Cafecito. I brought this up at DAC. I've talked to PTA presidents. I'll bring it up with MVEF. So we will continue to get more and more feedback across the board. And we will continue to, and then school sites will also be talking about this too, at PTA meetings, ELAC meetings, as well as site councils. We will continue to review and refine our plans of action because some of these guidelines change as the state provides more guidance. And we'll continue to monitor county data to determine the viability for opening. And then finally, I do plan on providing the Board of Trustees with feedback as well as a recommendation at a later board meeting. Originally it was planned for the next week, but at this point, it is really going to be dependent on what the data looks like. And so that is a week-to-week conversation. So what community engagement has happened? We've been asking community members knowing this information, what concerns or considerations do you have? And we've been getting great feedback. This is just a list of the meetings that have occurred this week or over the last couple of days. So again, last week we had DLAC focus groups, and then we'll also have a town hall coming up with staff so that we can understand staff's perceptions too. But we have been meeting with all of our stakeholders, which has been one of our goals. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. Are there further questions from trustees? Trustee Berman. Oh, I think
you touched on this just at the, can you hear me?
Yeah, you froze for a moment, but you came back.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. It was very thorough. You touched on this just at the very end about, when our COVID number drops, then we can have the conversation about reopening. My question was really about the sort of that timeline. So I know you had dates in mind there that are around the breaks in our schools, sort of those natural breaks that happen. Are those sort of like fixed dates in your mind? So if we were to get our numbers down by, the first week in February, but then maybe that February break wouldn't quite fit that timeline. So then would it get pushed out then until March, or could we be quicker to act? Or, what are your thoughts on that timeline between when that number of positive rates hits and when we can consider opening? And are we really fixed to those dates around the break times?
Yep. As they say, the best way to make God laugh is to have a plan. And so these are really just loose dates that we looked at every month to say, okay, if we had to pick an ideal date, what would that look like? And we just chose those particular dates. They're not dates that are set in stone. It just, when we were thinking about the 150-mile travel restriction and quarantining and how to bring people back. You know, especially the February break, that gives you a full week. And if you add in 3 days, it allows teachers the opportunity to, because there's 2 days that they in the MOU that they have for setting up their classrooms. So that means that you have 1 day in terms of quarantining. And so that gives you that 10 days that is required. And so that's why we sort of chose some of these dates. But again, this is a fluid situation that would change based off of where we are at any given point.
Trustee Chang, I think I saw you had a question.
Thank you. A question regarding the learning pods for the YMCA and our other partners. When they have any one test positive, is that counted in our numbers? And related to that, do we know what type of like health benefits that our third-party providers are providing their employees who serve our kids?
So I'll work backwards. We don't know what type of health benefits that they're providing, but I'm assuming that they have to comply. You know, if an employee is working more than 30 hours and they have to provide them health insurance. I don't know the quality of it. I don't think one organization is right at schools, the other one is the YMCA. So I'm not really sure. If we just think from the local level, I'm not sure what YMCA offers in terms of benefits, but I would assume that they have a competitive package compared to their peers. But we could definitely ask. We do include any members who are coming on our campus, especially because we have support pods, which is something that's unique to us. I know MVLA has some, but we view it as, you know, parents really need to know what the numbers look like at any given point in time. And because we do have kids who are on campus, we want to be extremely transparent and report all that data out. So every time we get a report about the numbers, we include that because we have, and I do want to point out, we have 4 different variations of support pods. We have Beyond the Bell, which is run by us, which is doing for our McKinney-Vento students, which isn't captured in this number, and that is over at Castro. We have Newton, who has support pods that are paid. We have the YMCA that has both paid and ones that are support paid by the district. And then we have Right at School that are also, they have some of their own that are being paid by parents. And then we have the ones that are targeted. And so across all of those, we felt it was really important to make sure that everyone knew exactly what was taking place in terms of the numbers, so that, you know, as a parent who was choosing to go to BUB, you knew exactly what the BUB numbers looked like in terms of the infection rate, so you can make a decision.
Are there further questions from trustees? Trustee Berman.
So I'm thinking about what specifically my question is, but I think that there are some small things to celebrate with some of the data with our EL students sort of sprinkled throughout engagement in the math. I'm still, you know, just really worried about that gap and that, you know, the sort of the inequities that we're seeing there when we look at the data, and really I'm really nervous about sort of what's coming up for our SED families in terms of the rent moratorium expiring at the end of January. So I just want us to be really thoughtful about the needs of our students at risk in our schools, and the needs of their parents, and just how we communicate with them about some of the options that are available to them, like through our district and through our just in our community, and just making sure that they have access to the same information that we're getting here. And you know, I'm seeing sort of these results that I know we're all really struggling with, and we all want our students to bridge that gap there. So I just want to find ways that as a school district, we can do whatever we can to support those students and their families until we get back to school.
Thank you, Trustee Berman. I do have a question So we've gotten some communication. It seems like there's currently an organized group of pediatricians and pediatric psychiatrists, psychologists who are pushing for school reopening kind of locally, but also regionally in this area, based on the mental health, the rise in mental health needs that they're seeing in children in a medical setting. And so I would love to know if, are there ways that we can, this is more a rhetorical question, are there ways that we can gather more data about the mental health of our children? Because it's kind of, right now, engagement seems to be our biggest metric for that, but it's a silent thing. Like do we have children suffering in silence and we don't know about it, and how do we find out and support them?
I think that's a pretty, it's going to be a pretty heavy lift in order to figure that out. And I think this question came up in the weekly. Something else would have to come off the plate in order for our teams to do it. I know Director Chang and I were talking about this earlier today. In terms of how we connect with families and sort of getting feedback and sort of, that, yes, we're doing a lot more outreach than what we've ever done before. But at the same time, they still have their traditional roles that they need to fulfill, and adding to that could sort of send people over the top. It doesn't mean that it's not possible. It's just, that was just a heavy lift, because it's not something that we traditionally think about in terms of school settings. And so we use a lot of proxies, like the number of kids who are being referred to Uplift, the number of kids who are being referred to CHAC, the number of referrals that we are seeing. And then obviously we have three counselors in our district, one at both middle schools and one at Castro. And so that can give us some idea also. But in terms of right now, those proxies serve as our best guess in terms of what is taking place. And then from there, what I would say is that, again, I think we would have to really think hard about how to pull that off. And I don't know if Director Jimbo has an idea, or Director Chang, or Director Degar, if any of them have an idea about any other ways to sort of measure that or get to those numbers.
I mean, could it be something as simple as, if it's hard, well, so I see like two possible pathways, and feel free to shoot them down, because I don't necessarily know like what's feasible or not. But one pathway could be, I know that LCAP survey is going to go out soon. Is there something folded into that LCAP survey that we can include that might indicate that? But that's a delayed indicator, because that gets processed by a third party. It takes time to get to us. Another idea was, could we just have a simple communication that teachers send out to their classrooms that say, look, like, we know this is a hard time. If you have concerns about your child's mental health, please reach out to me or to the principal, so that we can think more strategically about how to support your child. And if we do something like that, could we also give teachers some sort of like response protocols or tools that they can use to help funnel those children for support if they need support?
Again, I think something like that would require something has to come off the plate in order for us to do it. The bigger concern, and I see Ms. Jimbo, Mr. Jimbo's on there, so she may have some ideas about this, but the biggest concern deals with how we disaggregate all that data and how we collect it, and also the impact it would have on instructional time. But I'll let her, Director Jimbo, chime in.
I was just going to agree. It's a lot to unpack and a lot to build capacity around if you're trying to accomplish that within, a month to 2 months time in regards to the transitions, any transitions we're talking about, and or the continuation of care. the continuity of care. So I'm popped up to agree. It's a simple question, but it's a very large programmatic question.
Thank you. Trustee Chang and then Trustee Berman.
Picking back off President Conley's question about, we use Panorama for some services. Are there any third-party providers that could provide some kind of like check-in without putting more burden on our staff of the type of questions that President Conley is asking about mental health?
None that I know of, but I'll, the mental health support isn't the realm that I'm always focused on in terms of my day-to-day activities. And so, again, I'll turn it over to one of the directors, our Chief Academic Bauer, our Chief Human Relations Officer, Victor, to add.
And I can take that offline. It's right. I know we already use Panorama, and I know they have SCL tools, but I had another question with a different topic of the, from my understanding of our MOU, the 16 student cap, there's a waive clause in there possible. And is there a possibility for younger grade levels for teachers to be able to team teach I know in more grade level settings, if we were able to find a physical, let's say, outdoor space that made that possible. So like, would the MOU allow for two teachers to voluntarily decide to combine, given we're operating under the assumption if half their class was online, right? If half their class is at home, hypothetically, half their class is in class, then two teachers together would still be within the union class size average. So I just didn't know if that would be allowed by an MOU.
So the class size, the amount of students are in, it's predicated on the room size. It's not predicated on the number of teachers that could be assigned. And that is for us to be able to facilitate distance learning. The only way that two teachers could combine is if they went into a larger space. So which means that, like the MERs or the libraries will become inoperable because those larger spaces are being used by two teachers. Chief Human Relations Officer Victor, I don't know if you want to add.
No, that's actually exactly what I was just going to say. It's really about that socially distanced area in the classroom.
So if it was, let's say, just like one grade level, let's say the youngest grade levels, and if they wanted to team teach, it wouldn't be against the MOU if we could find the space for them.
If we could find the space and they wanted to do that, we could certainly have conversations about making things like that happen.
So what I do want to remind just everybody is that we need to be mindful that we also can't mix cohorts, right? So students the cohort they start in is a cohort that they have to remain in across the board. So if two teachers team taught, they would have to remain within that cohort the complete time, and other students wouldn't be able to get in. That is a requirement from the California Department of Public.
Trustee Berman.
So this goes back to the SEL. And maybe another idea is to just for all those families that are sort of letting us know that they are concerned about mental health, perhaps maybe even just like a toolkit or somewhere for them to go to find ideas or resources of how of what they can do at home with their kids might be really helpful, just as a starting point, because I think that as trustees, we are seeing a lot of messaging from parents that they're deeply concerned about their own children's mental health or someone they know or their own. So it would be nice to offer something to those families beyond just a recognition of their email and their concerns.
Vice President Blakely.
And I'm just wondering, maybe even some messaging in the newsletters, the principals' newsletters might be helpful.
So Ms. Jimbo is working on, Director Jimbo is working with our public information officer, Hausman, as well as our communications manager Commissioner to get some resources out next week, or not over the next couple of weeks.
Are there further questions from trustees?
I just had one more question, totally different topic. I just wanted to circle back to the math. I know that on the numbers, that it was expressed in the questions from the trustees, and we definitely see a struggle with middle school math. So when you look at the 7.0 and the 8.0, and it makes me think of having once been a math coach for elementary schools. Makes me think of foundational skills in elementary, and just what, how can we be supportive of all of those foundational skills? Because if we have kids in middle school that are struggling to be at grade level, it's obviously all the foundational skills, there's those gaps there in those skills. So I know that there is it called Yep? There's the app, right? There's like a tutoring program, which is terrific. I don't know how many of our students in 7.0 and 7.0 and 8.0 are accessing that tutoring program, but it makes me think of how to support more of our middle school students with math, and then how to be really focused in our elementary grades, especially 3, 4, 5, and supporting our students with those really essential foundational skills as they get to prepare them for middle school, and to work on these numbers to improve them. And I think really support our teachers with really robust math professional development too. And clearly it's during COVID, so everything feels so much harder, but it's definitely something I want us to think about how to plan for.
Chief Academic Bauer or Officer Bauer or Mr. Garr.
So I think there's a couple things with the data. The elementary schools are developing plans as they disaggregate their data and look at it for how to support students. They've been their focus for the last couple of weeks. And of course, the data is going to look different at each of our elementary schools, at each of our grade levels. So they're coming up with their own individual plans. We've also outlined essential standards that really need to be focused on and taught across our grade levels in elementary school. And I think this is also a conversation that will come up in our strategic plan of how we are supporting the foundational skills better in math, because while we can do a lot and our middle school teachers are math experts and they can do a lot and we have a lot of faith in them, we can't send kids to middle school that aren't ready for math. And so that's another part of the conversation with our strategic plan.
Thank you.
All right, if there are no further questions from trustees, Trustee Wheeler, are you trying to unmute? No, okay. We will move on to public comment at this time. If you would like to make a comment on this item, the return to reopening, or the reopening plan, you can raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom. If you click on participants at the bottom of your window, it will pop out a sidebar. And there are 3 little dots on the bottom of the sidebar. If you click on that, it will give you the option to raise your hand. I will wait just a little bit to see if people want to participate, and then allocate time based on that. Do we have any written comments on this item, Dr. Rudolph? No. We do not appear to have any public comment on this item at this time. Feel free to also write the board at trustees@mvwsd.org if you need time to digest this presentation a little bit, and then reach out to us afterward. Are there comments from trustees? Vice President Blakely?
I just appreciate all the work that you, Dr. Rudolph, and staff have put into, keeping us updated, putting the dashboards online, just trying to be very, very thorough. And I think a couple of my colleagues also said, I'm pleased that we are basically maintaining the education levels. I wish we were making the progress, because I think historically we've been saying we want to close the gap and move forward and, you know, have all kids do better. But compared to things I read in the media and, you know, even stories of neighbors who don't send their kids to our schools, we're doing reasonably well. And you know, that's not true for everybody. There's some kids that are really struggling with this distance learning, but overall, I think it's going well. And I just want to say kudos to the staff and the teachers who are working, you know, probably harder than they ever have. And also to all the parents who are being equal partners in their children's education. It's you know, it takes a village, and I'm pleased we are where we are. I'd like to see more progress, but given where we are, I'm happy about it. So thank you.
Trustee Berman, I see that you were unmuted.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the exact same thing that Trustee Blakely just shared. This has been really challenging, and I'm a parent here at home with my 2 kids, and I know that this has completely changed what our home life looks like. We've now brought our work and our school inside of our home, and it is really challenging to be a parent and a teacher here. But you know that I'll say my kids' teachers are my heroes. My kids are happy and excited to be part of their class, and I can hear those really fun and engaging lessons and conversations. And just a huge kudos to all of our teachers. They just pivoted so quickly to, you know, take their instruction and their lessons online. And I can't imagine how, like, that was such a huge undertaking. And to the staff and our district and our principals that have been supporting them all along. I mean, really to undergo this dramatic change in our system and to not see the type of learning loss that potentially could have happened, that I'm sure there are districts out there that other districts are probably seeing. I think it's definitely something to celebrate. So just kudos to Dr. Rudolph and your team, and to, like I said, the teachers out there. You really are my heroes. So thank you for everything. And I know we'll get through this, and we'll figure out the best way to come back and the safest way to come back.
Thank you. I just wanted to note for the public, we already opened up the floor for public comment and did the instructions and then waited for commentators, and people did not raise their hands at this time. So we aren't taking further public comment on this item at this time. We're having the trustee discussion and trustee comments now. Trustee Chang.
You know, I know we've had 2 trustees who talk about how amazing it is that teachers literally had to reinvent themselves in this district, and how much, like, the skills that they learned and the tools they picked up this year. I think we'll see those dividends paid out in that innovation and in the years to come after this pandemic. I did have some thoughts for the trustees about like looking at how there are certain decisions we made as a board, or us as a board, collectively speaking, including the previous board, that I wonder if there's some wisdom we can pull from. So in the past, and you know, it was the July 23rd meeting, the board decided to kind of set dates for reopening. And I actually wonder if I want to encourage our colleagues here to think that maybe that's the wrong approach. So if we're basing this on the science and data, and that local infection rates are the biggest danger to us reopening is what the local rates are, then pegging it to any particular date, I think was actually what failed us, because by pegging it to a date, we lost the opportunity to reopen when there was really low infection rates in the fall. So I encourage our colleagues to think of, let's do a reopening by a metric. So and let's do a safe metric. You know, like, we as a community, the parents and the teachers have all said we want safety is our #1 priority for the kids and for our staff. So we don't necessarily have to use the governor's metric, and governor's metric of 25 per 100,000. That's still level purple, but we could have used a conservative metric, like if the county goes red, that starts a 14-day clock. So we have a 14-day ramp up regardless. So red is a 7 out of 100,000. So rather than use the governor's 25 out of 100,000, if we use a conservative metric of 7 out of 100,000, and that's starting a 14-day clock, that kind of reopening policy would have allowed us to have taken advantage of safe moments in the fall, in the past. And I think it would allow us to act rapidly to not lose, like Dr. Rudolph said, this diminishing returns. Because if we set a date, we have to then meet, we have to vote on it. It just, there's a delay to that. And also, I recognize that at my workplace as a teacher, we have reopened. And I recognize that there's a lot of decisions I think about what I did at work. And we intentionally didn't tie it to vacations. So I understand that, right, there's been discussion of tying it to like, oh, after the kids get back from a break. And at my school, we purposely avoided that because kids travel during breaks. So like there's so many pros and cons of any given day for reopening. So if you reopen right after a holiday break, you run the risk of kids having traveled outside the region. So I just kind of, that's the first point, thinking that like if we tie this to, a metric that we feel safe, that really respects our community, then I think that really is the most scientific approach. And kind of the second point about I'm so amazed that the teachers have agreed in their MOU to teach both in person and online at the same time. I did a pilot of that this summer for my school to help them with their reopening. And it is the hardest form of teaching you could ever imagine, trying to mind kids on Zoom and their needs and mind kids in the classroom. We're asking a lot, and it's amazing that the teachers are saying they're willing to step up to that. That just speaks so much of Mount BWSD teachers. But I also need to make sure we take care of them, because that idea, as much as they say yes to it, that is a burnout model. So when I made that comment about the younger grades of seeing if we can have team teaching, I know that the schools that do simulcasting, that's what they had to do. So a lot of independent schools are doing that model, but they have 2 teachers in the classroom. And if we can't do teachers, can we do parent volunteers or something? But for youngest kids, you're talking kindergarten and first grade, it is asking something heroic and I think impossible for a teacher to be minding the needs on Zoom and in the classroom for a sustainable period of time. So that's kind of the 2 biggest things I just want to throw out to our colleagues here. Thank you, President Connolly.
Thank you. Are there other comments from trustees? I would like to, if there are no further comments, I'll comment. I think, so one of the challenges that we've seen this year is, well, a year since the first case was found in the United States, is that as we learn more about this virus, our metrics actually change. And so I understand I wish the state would give us a number that was safe rather than just a number that is not horrific, right? But I don't feel like in all of that, like I am pursuing all of the information I can by attending meetings across the board and watching the county meetings and I hate to say it, but those metrics just keep moving, which is really frustrating. I think with this new variant 452R, the current debate is it more infectious than the previous form of the virus that we had locally? And even if it's still true that children under 10 are half as likely to spread it, the incidence could increase just because there's more of an infection rate. And when we talked about in the fall, planning ahead, what we knew was coming was the winter. We knew that Thanksgiving, December, these times when people were going to gather was coming. And so, yes, we could have, in theory, opened. I think the last time we could have opened probably was just before Thanksgiving. And then after Thanksgiving, we quickly went back into the purple because rates just went off the charts. And so it's just such it's a struggle. It's really a complex struggle. I worry about COVID fatigue that families are experiencing now. I know we're seeing it in terms of mobility, and we saw it over the holidays, and that's why our rates spiked so much, and why, you know, we're really looking at a huge number of deaths right now. The county can't even get the most up-to-date data on it because it's so, the deaths are just so much more than they had been previously. But I worry about, we're going to hit ski week and people are going to travel, and we could be in the red the day after ski week, and then 2 weeks later we could be back into very, very dangerous levels. So I hear what you're saying, Trustee Chang. I just am not sure how to do it successfully. And I really encourage families right now, if you are hitting a bit of a wall, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, I'm a little tired. This is hard. This is really hard, and it's been a long time, and like, we don't have a window right now for when it's going to end, because the vaccine rollout has been so bungled at the federal level and then is really dragging at our state and county level. Reach out to your teachers and let them know if you think your child needs extra support. Like, please be that active parent for your children, and reach out about that. But also, when it comes to whether or not we reopen this year and diminishing returns, I'm also thinking about August. And we know that the vaccine has not been tested in children under 12 yet. So they will most likely not be vaccinated by August. I'm going to be lucky if I'm vaccinated by August, right? I hope our teachers get vaccinated sooner rather than later, but it's a hot mess right now. So when we do reach August, if we reopen for in-person in August, it will probably be in a hybrid format like what we're discussing today. And I wonder, I don't know if it would be helpful, but I wonder if even if we reopen for a short time period this spring, it gives us a chance to test things out that we might have to then beef up and continue, you know, August through December next year while we wait for a children's vaccine and children to get vaccinated. I just want to put that out there. It's not prescriptive. It's just kind of what I've been thinking about lately. Are there any other further comments from trustees? Trustee Berman.
I just want us to encourage us to make sure we're really looking at data. I mean, there are kids that are back at school and during this time when the infections are really high. So during this period, let's just keep looking at the data on how the virus is spreading among kids at school and among the adults at school. And I know what I've been hearing is that the trend is that it is among the adults more so than the kids and the behaviors that are happening in the classroom. So yeah, I just, you know, in this presentation, we didn't hear a ton about you know, the spread, the viral load in kids necessarily, and that's okay. But I think that there's an opportunity right now to really look at, now that we're in the peak, how is that impacting schools and children and closures, and really use that data so that when we hit that number, I think we can have some constructive conversation based on data to see if it makes sense too.
I agree, and I think that that data is tied to districts with a similar student population in terms of low-income families and Latino families and families who are essential workers. And that's one of the challenges, is the schools that we know of closest to us that are reopened do not have a similar student population. And we have seen 21 adults who have tested positive versus 5 children. But yeah, it's going to be something that we're going to be paying attention to for a long time, I think. Trustee Chang.
You know, when I know we get a lot of emails about data and kind of people talking about other school districts, and you know, it's really interesting for me because like we're really, as a city, we're at the border, right? Like north of us, we have Los Altos and Palo Alto open, and the south of us are all closed, and it really does come down to demographics. You know, I was just looking at the California Department of Ed website, and they said that they just had a report that 64% of the children that were that got affected with COVID-19 were Latino and Latinx. So 64% of infected kids are of a minority group, and like the data, the demographics are different for neighboring districts. I would say that like if we don't find some way to create a ramp up system of like within that 2-week window of thing, like we may really need to focus most of our energy now on preparing for distance learning, because like we spent many of these last board meetings on, the meeting in October and the meeting in July, it's all about reopening. And we spend very little of it on distance. And the reality has been for distance, and reality may be for distance even for a good portion of our population in the fall. So, and we've been doing great things, but maybe that should also be our board leadership attention. I wonder if, when I was asking the question about, are we spending enough money on Edtech, like, are we giving teachers, what if we allocated teachers funds so they can buy hardware and subscriptions and really kind of double down on the innovation they're doing? There's a lot of, and in addition to that, if we don't reopen, there's creative options about, do we bring sports back? Do we bring, some type of in-person? That's what Palo Alto Unified is debating right now for the middle school and high school, because, under currently, if we weren't in a stay-home order under purple, schools are allowed to do cross-country, hikes, and track. And under red, they're able to do baseball, and I think that's one of the only sports we play, or softball as well. And you don't get to do basketball and things until it's orange. But like, if we find ways to get kids on campus for team sports or activities, similar to what Palo Alto Unified is pivoting to for their middle school and high school, that might be something. Like, if we, at some point, we just have to say, like, you know what, we're going to stop talking reopening. And if that's not going to happen, because like I still think having a metric of saying red for 14 days is safe. But if that's not what our colleagues want, then like maybe we need to say, okay, let's put all our energy on what we are going to do, which is going to be the best distance learning program possible. And knowing that we're going to have to do that in the fall for a segment anyway. So.
That's part of why in October we decided to wait until January to discuss it too, right? We discussed in the board meetings to double down on distance learning because we needed to figure it out. We knew we were going to have to do it in some format. I really want Rhythm and Moves to come back, and that's up to the county and the state right now. I know we were so close to getting that program back, and then we went into the shelter in place. So hopefully our case counts will start to go down at some point, and we'll be able to actually start that program for our elementary school students on campus. All right, if there are no further comments, we will now move on to our next item, which is a discussion of the Local Control Accountability Plan and Strategic Plan 2027 timeline. And with the presentation from Chief Academic Officer Bauer. But how about we take a 5-minute bio break first? Thank you, Trustee Blakely. I will see you back at 8:01. All right, welcome back, everyone. We will now move on to item 6B, the Local Control Accountability Plan, Strategic Plan 2027 timeline with Chief Academic Officer Kathy Bauer.
Thank you. So tonight I am going to just share with you our plan and timeline for the local accountability plan. As you know, and you've heard, as we're developing our strategic plan, we'll also be developing a 3-year LCAP at the same time. So just as we know, over the last few years, our strategic plan really defines and guides our work. And our LCAP aligns to the strategic plan, and it's a required plan by the California Department of Education. Tonight, we're just going to review the LCAP Strategic Plan 2021 a little bit, talk a little bit about funding, and then the development of the next year's LCAP and strategic plan. Just a reminder, our Strategic Plan 2021 developed in 2015-16 with a lot of stakeholder engagement. And it was really the blueprint that's guided our work. And we have done amazing work, I think, over the past 6 years based on the effort to create our strategic plan. We've made a lot of progress for our students, and our work has really been intentional and targeted. And the strategic plan has allowed us to stay focused and not deviate from things and muddle our focus. And it's a good picture of leaving the 2021 strategic plan as leaves us with a picture of what we need to do to continue. We've had a lot of successes. These are just some highlights with student achievement. Oh, I really should be doing this. I'm sorry. Student achievement, we created an I'm Ready guide. We've increased district test scores. We implemented SIOP to support our English learners. We've created a digital maintenance system. We completed our Measure G. We've had operating procedures for communication. We conducted Parent University. We've retained highly qualified staff members and raised salaries and implemented coaches throughout the district. So just a little reminder about the LCAP, or the Local Control Accountability Plan. We have to develop 3-year plans that show our goals and strategies for improving student achievement. Our goals have to address the 8 state priorities, and our budget must be aligned to the LCAP, and our budget must show that we have the money to carry out all of the services that are listed in our LCAP. We also have a federal addendum, which outlines how we're using federal funds. And all of these pieces, the LCAP, the addendum, the annual updates, the budget, all get approved by July 1 of each school year. These are just the 8 state priorities. We're responsible for all except the 2 in gray. Services for foster youth and instruction of expelled students are for our county offices of education. So it's just some changes and some history. Excuse me. We were last spring in the process of refreshing Strategic Plan 2021 and creating our new 3-year LCAP when school closed. And at that point, we suspended work on that and started to create plans to support our students and families. That was the most important thing at that time. In April, Governor Newsom issued an executive order to extend the deadline for districts to create their LCAPs. This was purposeful so that we could focus on the impact of closure. And instead of submitting the LCAP, we had to submit the COVID-19 operations written report, which was approved by the Board of Trustees in June. The operations written report asked districts to do the following: explains changes to program offerings, how we're meeting the needs of English learners, steps that were taken to continue delivering distance learning, and describe the steps that have been taken to maintain meals and to arrange for supervision of students. Excuse me. The order also called for a 1-year LCAP to be approved in December, but then in June, Governor Newsom signed Senate Bill 98, which mandated the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan, the LCP, instead of the LCAP. And the LCP was for us to really outline what we were going to do to return to school in August and September. And it was helpful to not have to do both two plans, an LCAP and an LCP. The LCP talks about how we're addressing gaps in learning, how we conducted stakeholder engagement, how we're addressing the needs of unduplicated pupils, how we were providing technology, providing resources and supports, and how we're providing school meals. And that plan was presented and approved in September. So now in the spring, we're going to go back to our regular process. We're going to complete a 3-year LCAP following the same process for stakeholder engagement and approval. And that will be in conjunction with the budget. We'll be completing an annual update on the 2019-2020 LCAP. We have not seen what that looks like yet. The template for that should be approved sometime this month. We'll also be completing an annual update on the 2020-2021 LCP, which we'll present. We'll bring you the federal addendum, and we'll also we'll be presenting our local indicators information for approval in June. We usually bring that in November ahead of the California dashboard, and they've put everything together. So now we're going to bring it all at once. And our LCAP will be aligned to our district strategic plan 2027, which is concurrently being developed. Oops, just a reminder for funding, for LCAP funding sources and strategic plan, that we're community funded. Our district's funding is based on local property taxes, and we use a variety of funding sources to meet the needs of our students. We use our property taxes, we use our shoreline monies, MVEF supports, our federal monies, and our Measure B. And this is just a nice little kind of visual that Dr. Westover, I think, put together just to show how this works for us, and how we end up using local property taxes. And if those exceed what we were supposed to get from the LCFF, we get to keep the extra money, which is nice for us. It's a visual so you can kind of see what's been happening and what will happen over the course of the next few years. We had our 2016 to 2019 LCAP and our strategic plan. The end dates didn't quite line up. We then had to create that's why we were going to do a refresh. Then we had to do the LCP plan for this year. And now it'll be nice. We'll have our strategic plan 2021 to 27, which spans 6 years. And we'll go through 2 cycles of 3-year LPACs. So everything lines up nicely together. And on our strategic plan 2027, I know you're very familiar with what we've been doing. We started in September with our survey and our input sessions. We created the strategic plan framework, which had our 5 goal areas. And then in October, we worked again to get at community meetings and to get input from lots of different stakeholder groups. And we ended up in November with our framework, which has our objectives. And you all approved this in November. It's very exciting. And now currently we're working in teams to develop strategic initiatives that go along with each of the objectives. So timeline, we're starting off everything for the LCAP this week. You can see we've been out presenting. Our survey for LCAP opens on Monday and will run through February 12th. And our sites and our departments will be out presenting information to their stakeholder groups and providing time for stakeholders and staff to take the survey. Then we'll be working on completing the annual updates and continuing our work on our strategic initiatives. We should get our survey data back sometime in mid-March. We'll be looking to develop action plans for the strategic plan and on drafting our LCAP. And in May, being able to post our draft of our LCAP for public comment, and then coming back for public hearing and for approval in June. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, and we'll be sending out to the community information on the survey and the survey links either tomorrow or Monday.
Thank you, Officer Bauer. Are there questions from trustees? Trustee Chang and then Trustee Blakely.
Thank you. The strategic plan, when the district develops their particular targeted goals for that, is the March 4th meeting in your slide, is that the first meeting that the board will be part of that process, or do you imagine there's inputs for the board prior to March 4th?
My understanding is that we're presenting for information to the board in March.
And are there opportunity, or will board members be subgroups of board members be in any work groups or anything prior to March 4th, or will March 4th be the first time?
My understanding is no, that it's being work that's being done by staff.
Vice President Blakely.
I'm just curious, I know there's been a lot of, the target keeps moving, but at this point, is it easier and does it take less time to do this all in a kind of more cohesive, consolidated manner, or is it just as much work as it was when you had these different pieces that didn't quite link up or align?
I'll be honest, I think having the strategic plan is great because it really, like I said, that's our blueprint. And so that really drives our LCAP. So in some ways that makes it much easier for me. And I think I froze.
We can still hear you.
Well, that's been the day.
We can hear you though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
great.
we can still hear you. We just couldn't.
Oh, good. Well, I didn't know that. So that's been my night. I've been in and out of this meeting all night. Having the strategic plan is great. It's still a lot of work. Writing a three-year LCAP, it's a lot of work for me and my team. It's a lot of work for our business department that's also trying to do an annual update, and they're also trying to develop the budget for next year, and they're trying to do this. It's definitely a ton of work, but in the end, having something that really defines where we're going is really important.
Good. Well, thank you for the work.
Are there further questions from trustees? Trustee Berman.
So yes, thank you for the work. Can you remind me with the LCAP survey, this is different from the Panorama survey, right? So the Panorama survey comes out. I think I'm mixing up all of my surveys in my brain as a parent. So can you remind me? So this is different than an end of year survey. And this one comes out now, the other one comes out later. Is that correct?
So we, with changes to requirements for our climate surveys and different things, we opted last year to combine pieces of Panorama into our LCAP survey so that we were only doing one survey and not, we felt like some of our constituents and stakeholders were starting to have survey fatigue. And so Panorama is incorporated into LCAP.
Got it. Maybe that's why I had it all mixed up in my brain. Thank you. And is there a way for families who maybe, so this is usually the survey you click, you take the survey, it's online. Will there be paper copies for families if that's a struggle? Where can they get them?
We always provide paper copies to sites. We ask the sites how many they want. We provide them. It's going to be a little tricky this year with school closure, but we'll work carefully with the sites that need it. And then we really count on our SCEFs to work with our families as well, because we want to hear from as many families as we can.
Okay. And I noticed in the timeline too, there's DLAC, it's being presented to DLAC at the beginning, and but for feedback on the results, I think it was it in March? I'm trying to think of what the timeline was. I didn't see DLAC on there.
I don't think, yes, I didn't spell out the dates, but we go back to DLAC and District Advisory Committee in May, and we get their feedback, and we respond to all of their questions, comments, and concerns in writing, post them as well. So that's all happens in May.
Great, because I saw ELEC in there, but I didn't see DLAC.
I didn't put
it to happen in both places.
Didn't put this. We go to all the advisory groups in May.
Awesome, thank you.
Are there further questions? All right, at this time, we will open this item up for public comment. If you are a member of the public and you would like to comment on the LCAP Strategic Plan 2027 timeline, you can raise your hand in Zoom using the raise hand function. Click on participants at the bottom of your screen and it will pop out a sidebar. If you click on the small 3 dots at the bottom, it will give you the option to raise your hand. If you're calling on a phone, you can press *9. And I don't believe we have any written comments on this item. Is that correct, Dr. Rudolph?
That's right.
And it looks like we do not have any public comments at this time. Are there comments from trustees? Trustee Chang?
A question for colleagues on the board. For those of us who are new on with the strategic plan and LCAP, between those two, does that replace kind of the past process when it used to be like the board and the superintendent used to kind of develop annual goals, and sometimes it was in a retreat setting and things? So between the LCAP and the long-term strategic plan, is that a replacement of that old process?
So we discussed when we had our agenda item about the retreat, because we're doing it in the evening and because this strategic plan is still kind of being, this first initiative phase is being finalized, we discussed splitting that meeting in half so that the meeting that we're going to have next week is focused more on bylaws and communication and board norms and that type of thing. And then we're going to have a second meeting. Now it looks like, I don't know if it will be in February or March, where we will actually work on those goals. I'm wondering if we need to do it shortly after this, shortly after we get the input, the presentation on March 4th, to work on those district goals with the superintendent and our board. And other trustees, feel free to answer, those of you. Yes, Vice President Blakely.
I was just going to say, I think we had discussed, because this is a new strategic plan for 6 years, that we were really going to try to keep the goals to the ones that are articulated in the plan and perhaps focus on certain ones in a given year, but we were going to try not to tack on a whole bunch of extra goals as we had in some of the other years, because it just, I mean, things are important, but we want to fold them under those primary goals. It gets too distracting and too diffuse, and it's hard to really stay focused on the real meat, which is the plan itself. Is that your recollection also, Trustee Conley and Wheeler?
I see Trustee Wheeler nodding.
Yeah.
Are there further comments from trustees? All right. Thank you very much, Chief Academic Officer Bauer. We will now move on to item 6C, the governor's proposed state budget, with Dr. Westover, our Chief Business Officer.
Good evening again. Last presentation of the evening. Okay. So as we kind of dive into the governor's proposed state budget, maybe just a quick recap of what happened last year. So last year at this time, I came in front of you and was talking about what the governor was proposing. And I think we were probably grousing a little bit about the COLA and wishing the COLA was a little bit more. And then the pandemic hit and everything went upside down. So I think it's just a reminder that what the governor proposes isn't necessarily what's going to happen once the budget is adopted. This just gives us an idea of what might occur. So as I go through this, there are some things that we already know, because things are continuing to change so quickly, that we already know are going to be changed. But it gives us an idea of what the governor is thinking and a rough idea of what we might expect. So connecting it back to our strategic plan, we have a goal of resource stewardship to make sure that we maintain a balanced general fund. Of course, we can deficit spend through a board resolution as long as we are between 17 and 20% in the third year out. This is our budget adoption process. So right now we have kind of 2 budgets going at once. We have our current year, and we'll come in front of you to go through the second interim in March. And we're also monitoring what to expect for the following year. So here we are right in January with the governor's proposed state budget. We'll give you second interim in March, and then come spring, we're going to continue to monitor what's happening with the budget for next year. And then we'll come back to you to do an adoption for the budget for next year. Looking at our revenue, so as we talk about the governor's proposed budget, we also have to keep in mind, Dr. Rudolph mentioned this several times earlier today, that we are a basic aid district. So looking at where our funds come from, 91%, this is from our 2021 adopted budget, 91% of our budget comes from local revenue. So the piece that we're talking about for the governor's proposed budget is a small portion of our actual overall operations. Looking at our assessment role, so when we talk about a basic aid district, we are very much impacted by the AV growth. So this is a chart looking back to 16-17, and then this year, 21-22, and how property growth is trending. What's interesting to note is sometimes we can see a decrease when there are adjustments made to the roll. We were also notified that the California Consumer Price Index will be adjusted in February's report downward to match the CCPI factor of 1.036 instead of the 2% that we normally see. So what that means is come February, we could see a lower number than what's here at 2.66. We're not quite sure yet. Looking at our developer fees. So developer fees are fees that we take in when new development occurs in the city. These fees can be used for modernization or construction of new buildings. And we can see that there's still a lot of construction going on in Mountain View, or planned construction. So some themes and highlights. The governor is focused on rebuilding the state's financial reserves and fiscal footing as a priority. In public education, he's prioritized addressing long-standing inequities illuminated by the pandemic. He has a focus on early action initiatives to get young and vulnerable students back in the classroom with targeted academic interventions and opportunities to accelerate learning. He also has increased funding across all segments from early childhood education through the University of California system. So looking at the COLA that we were talking about, in the 2021 year, the funded COLA was 0%. However, for the 21-22 year, the funded COLA will be at 3.84%. So trying to make up a little bit for not having the COLA in the 2021 year, although we won't get money paid back to us for that 2021 year. The categorical programs will receive a 1.5% increase. So they won't receive the same 3.84% COLA. For special education, he continues to prioritize special education. The base special education funding formula will be increased to $625 per ADA. And this, of course, would go to our SELPAs. It would bring the new base funding rate to $634.38. Unfortunately, it does not have a COLA added to it. This is also brand new as of, I think, day before yesterday, language came out on the extended learning time and academic intervention grants. So this is a proposal to help make up for lost learning time through targeted grants specifically for low-income, foster youth, English learners, and homeless youth. And this is the largest one-time investment in K-12 education if this were to go through. For our district, we're looking at about $3.1 million. There's also CARES Act child nutrition reimbursements. They've added an additional 75 cents per meal for all meals that we are reimbursed for. This really came through because most school districts are needing to fund their child nutrition program more so than they would during the regular year. And this is true for Mountain View Wisman as well, because we don't have the income of our paid meals to help offset some costs. And we're also we have a fully staffed kitchen. So this was a way to try to help districts make up for that difference. On December 27th, President Trump signed the 2.3 trillion Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021 into law. It included 900 billion COVID-19 relief package, which earmarks 82 billion for education, 7 billion to expand broadband access, 10 billion for childcare, and continued funding for school meal programs. It also includes an extension of the CARES Act Coronavirus Relief Fund expenditure deadline from December 30th, 2020 to December 31st, 2021. In our case, we had already fully expended those funds, so this date didn't impact us at all. There's also new COVID-19 federal funds that are available. At least 90% of the ESSER funding needs to be allocated to LEAs in proportion to their 2021 Title I Part A funding, which expires in September 30th, 2023. His budget doesn't specify how the state will spend the remaining 10%. So in the past, he had decided to spend that 10% on schools, but he hasn't said, he's been silent on this piece. He has discretion on how he wants to spend those funds. Also, this was talked about earlier today about the funding for reopening schools. We know that there's a big push from the governor to reopen schools. Right now, the base grants of $450 to reopen in February, for the most part, is being seen as dead on arrival, because right now, even if districts wanted to apply for this, there's nowhere for them to send the application to. So our next steps. On March 4th, we'll present the 2021 second interim. This will update you on where we are financially, and we'll continue to monitor the state budget and steps taken towards implementation for next year.
Thank you, Dr. Westover. Are there questions from trustees? Trustee Wheeler.
I think she's muted.
She is muted.
There we go. Am I?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So 2 questions. One of them is easy. The easy question is this presentation up on our website now?
It will be. I just updated it last night with the new extended learning. I was kind of holding off because we kept getting new information.
Okay, so where on our website will it be?
So under the board, when you go to the board agendas, whenever.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And so this is a conversation you and I have had in the past. So school services does a presentation for basic aid districts. And I'm wondering if you've been to that one yet, or are you planning to? And what else do you learn in that presentation that, you know, for the 91% of our money that's local?
Sure. We love school services. They don't think they've had one this year just for basic aid districts, but the county holds a basic aid meeting every month. And we've found that very, very informative because Larry Stone will tell us kind of what he's seeing in the economy, how he thinks it's going to impact property taxes. So we've been following that very, very closely.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from trustees? Trustee Ching.
Dr. Westover, thank you for that presentation. Every time real credit to you and your team that we have such a professional and clear presentation on these budgets. So the question, some districts have, I know Palo Unified has begun talking about summer and summer learning and the cost of running summer camps and things. How does that, what's our timeline for us as a community to discuss that and impact the budget? Like, is there like a sweet spot on when we really need to discuss summer school if we were actually going to launch, given the impact on the budget?
Yeah, I think, you know, as a school district, we always have to be flexible based on the needs of the students. I think the earlier we discuss it, the better, because it means we can plan. In terms of the COVID funds, so some of the funds that we receive are pretty they're restricted. And in general, in terms of strategy, we want to make sure that we spend our most restricted dollars first. and then spend our least restrictive later. So I think we want to plan to spend our COVID funds on whatever it is that's applicable. So whether it be additional cleaning supplies or teachers, and not reserve it necessarily to pay for summer school. Because either way, it still comes out of our general bucket of what we have to pay for. I think just strategy wise, we should make sure to spend our most restricted money the first. I don't know if that helps answer it all.
Summer school also comes out of next year's budget. It doesn't come out of this year's.
Trustee Blakely.
Isn't one of the biggest gating items for summer school the availability of qualified teachers that are interested in teaching it? That had been my understanding, that a lot of our staff felt like they needed the summer, and I'm guessing that may be even more true this year. And perhaps there's contract teachers, but that was my understanding that that was a significant gating item.
Yes, I will say we've just actually, Director Chang and I have just started talking about summer school and summer programming and what it could look like. I do think that that's been our struggle over the past years, is getting teachers to want to teach over the summer, finding qualified teachers who want to teach over the summer, not using our own. Yeah, it can be a little tough. And I'm wondering where we'll be in the summer. Do we plan for in person? Do we plan for online? Do parents want their kids online? I mean, there's all these questions that we're going to wrestle with as we go through, but we know that we want to provide whatever we can for our students. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Are there further questions from trustees? Trustee Chang.
It's a budget question, but it's kind of more related to about summer, about the outdoor ed experiences that we didn't do this year. In past budgets we earmarked for that to pay for those. Are there opportunities where some of those things can happen in summer, or is that a completely different budget cycle? And I didn't even know if any of these any of our outdoor partners are offering programs in the summer. If they offer programs in summer, if conditions are safe to do so, Yosemite and things like that.
So my understanding from just the communications I've received from Yosemite to date for planning for next year is they're not opening for in-person overnights, possibly till spring of 2022. I have not heard from Walden West. They don't typically offer school-based programs in the summer, but you never know what can happen. Those are things that we can always look into.
Go ahead, Trustee Chang.
If budget permitting, are there, related to Trustee Blakely's question about finding the teachers, are there third-party providers that district has looked into that literally can run a program using our facilities, meeting the goals of the district? And
we have not. We have worked with Olympico Learning in the past, which is a third-party provider. I'm sure there's more out there. We would have to research that.
Are there any further questions? Okay, we will move to public comment. If you are a member of the public and you would like to comment on this item, you can raise your hand in Zoom using the raise hand function at this time. At the bottom of your screen, you click on participants. It pops out a sidebar, and there are 3 small dots at the bottom of the sidebar. If you click on those, it will give you the option to raise your hand. If you're on a phone, you should be able to press *9. Dr. Rudolph, do we have any written comments on this item? I think from earlier today, we did not have written comments on this, and we do not have members of the public with their hands raised. Are there comments from trustees? Oh, Nancy Rodriguez is talking. Where is she? She is muted. Yes, Ms. Rodriguez.
We did not receive any comments on this item.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rodriguez. All right, are there comments from trustees? Trustee Chang. Oh, you are muted, Trustee Chang. There you go.
Just something I personally would be interested in seeing on the March 4th when we see the budget back. And the last time we had the budget presentation, and again, these presentations, like I'm so grateful for that we are so lucky to have such a competent and like team. Dr. Westover is leaving. The one area I asked last time was about trying to better understand how our district each year spends money on professional services. And the reason I ask that is because, you know, it comes up in the public on like, you know, how much are we spending on like on legal fees and things like that. And I think it is something that I personally think in our next budget report, taking that category, because it's such a big category, like when you look at when you skim through the budget report and you see category 5800, $10 million, it's like, wow, that's large. And it's really hard to understand what goes in there. And things like legal fees can help us understand. And like, you know, we have members of our community who like bring up legal issues and cost us legal money. And like, so I think that's a category I just interested in, whether it be in the board report or offline. That's just something, though I think it's something that there's a broader public that'd be interested in knowing, just the large items that go into that accounting category. Not that big of a deal, but I would welcome seeing that.
I want to be careful we don't veer onto sort of a non-agendized item. I don't think you did, but I think we could steer that way accidentally, because this is about the governor's proposed budget and not necessarily our interim budget discussions that we regularly have.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder.
Are there other comments from trustees? All right, thank you very much, Dr. Westover. I think you are getting similar presentations to what the County Office of Ed gave board members yesterday. I did want to note for the public, just one of the things that's really interesting about this, we had thought there's a big windfall this year in revenues for the state that was unexpected. But now the governor is starting to get a little more conservative, because the projection on jobs is that our jobs are not going to return to their level pre-COVID until around 2025. So looking at the ongoing budget for the state, right now we would be deficit spending in future years if we continue with the budget that we currently have. So the governor has opted to start putting away more money in preparation for those future years while we try to recover jobs. Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, and so I've read from a lot of education sources that, you know, cautioning us not to use the word windfall, because it makes it sound like education has a lot of money, and we don't have a lot of money. So, and there's plenty of things we would like to do that we cannot do because we don't have the money. And to your point, you know, the governor is wisely going to start putting more money in the rainy day fund. So I'm trying to not use that term, and I'm, you know, encouraging all of us to not use it too.
Thank you, Trustee Wheeler. All right, we will now move on to item 7, board updates. I have emailed mine in. It is my New Year's resolution to do so. I encourage you all to do so as well. Yes, Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, so I emailed mine in, but I took advantage of the discussion last time to put some books into my board update, and I'm going to do a little show and tell right now, and it's going to show you, explain why I sent you that Julian Bond, John Lewis magazine story earlier today. So I just finished reading His Truth is Marching On, John Lewis and the Power of Hope by John Meacham. I highly recommend it. I think a lot of us think we know about John Lewis, and I'll tell you, I learned mountains more about John Lewis than I was ever aware of. And then today reading that magazine story, I know this was really nerdy from a historian perspective. I loved the story about Julian Bond versus John Lewis running for the congressional seat that John Lewis eventually won and then held, and we know of him as John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis. Anyway, I highly recommend the book. So there's my report.
Thank you very much, Trustee Wheeler. All right, we will now move on to item 7, items for future agendas. On here, we have an upcoming presentation on mental health and social emotional learning. Are there any other proposed items for future agendas? Trustee Chang.
I'd like to propose a item to have the board provide some broad, non-detailed discussion on the Monte Loma perimeter issue. When I was looking back at the date, this issue, the board talked a little about August 20th and October 22nd, but none of those were actually agendized items. So those conversations never happened for a topic that has such public interest. It's unusual that it's gone this long without the publicly elected officials to be part of a process since we're elected by the public. So, so my suggestion to us as a board is to have that discussion instead of having it be tangential as it was in the past meetings.
My understanding, and Dr. Rudolph can clarify for us, is that the working group will be presenting to the boards on the Monte Loma plans and what the working group.
This is correct.
So it will be. Go ahead, Dr. Rudolph. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to affirm what you were saying. So the goal is that they will bring updates to the board. The board will be able to then provide feedback, and then it'll just go through that both back and forth until we get to the final iteration, similar to what the Enrollment's Priorities Task Force, as well as the Students Attendance Areas Task Force did over the course of
Okay, so it will be on the agenda, Trustee Chang.
Oh, I was just meaning to say that us as a board, elected officials, provides a public outlet and often sometimes I think can de-escalate issues. But I see, for lack of a second, I don't want to take any more time on this if there's no one on the board interested in having an earlier conversation.
So I will say I'm highly interested in this, but I also understand how that process is going to work. I think there's going to be opportunity for the board to provide input to the work group. So it's not just going to be a slam bang kind of thing. I think it's going to, so like Dr. Rudolph was talking about, referencing other, longer work groups that we've worked with. And there was back and forth between the work group and the school board. So it's not for lack of interest, Trustee Chang. It's that I understand, I've seen this process before. So I'm interested in seeing how it works this time.
I concur with what Trustee Wheeler just said.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I did.
And I'm sorry. Just one other thing. I know that the Monte Loma families or the neighborhood just submitted applications and stuff to be in the working group, and I just wanted to give a shout out to all the people that have been involved in that process and that submitted applications and are willing to do that work. So thank you.
So, and speaking of that, Laura Blakely and Laura Ramirez Berman and I attended the DAC meeting where those DAC members were tasked with looking at applications and then, making a recommendation of which 2 people from the applicants will be on that work group from the community. And so Dr. Westover, I'm interested in one, learning the names of those 2 people once they're selected. And I don't know if you want to unveil all the names of everybody who is on the list, but I certainly would like to, once those people are named, I'd like to see what their application was on that form. So, you know, all we saw was, you know, person A through G or A through H. So I'd like to know, you know, who were they?
So I am hoping that this can be followed up on probably in writing. Again, I'm wary of us veering off too much onto a topic that we haven't agendized. Just because I know there are people who want to give input around this and might be upset if we say, you know, if Dr. Westover started presenting now when we didn't have it as an agenda item. But I mean, clearly there's a lot of interest. And so it's going, I second Trustee Blakely and Trustee Wheeler in the sense that I want the working group to have an opportunity to work, and I want to hear from them. And then I definitely want to have discussion as a board. Absolutely. Yes, Trustee Ching, and then Trustee Berman.
Oh, my question's not on this topic. Is Trustee Berman's
so
on
we're
this?
still on future agenda items.
Oh, yes, but if not on this perimeter suggestion,
Okay.
which didn't have a second.
Trustee Berman?
Real quick, I just want to put in my 2 cents. So yeah, it was good to be at the DAC meeting yesterday. And I believe that at their future meetings, we can be observers too. And I think that will help us, you know, understand the process better too. Is that correct? That we cannot participate, but we as board members or anybody, it's open to the public, the meetings for this working group. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Rudolph.
That is correct. As long as board members are allowed to observe, but they are not allowed to opine or interact while they're in the meeting.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Ching.
Clarify question on on our future agendas thing. The Trustee Berman's thing, the mental health and social emotional learning. Maybe I missed it, but is there a date or when that conversation is coming back?
We don't have a date on it firmly yet. Dr. Rudolph?
We do not have a date on that one as of yet. It'll be something that's in the process as Ms. Director Jimbo gets up to speed. So we have a couple of other items that are coming up in February that Mrs. Henderson is going to bring to the table that sort of start the conversation around equity and diversity and some other items. But we have a little time before she'll come up.
Will they be at the retreat, Dr. Rudolph, our Director of SEL and Director of Equity?
No. Typically, as of late, we have not brought cabinet members to the board retreats. It's just been the superintendent, the facilitator, and trustees.
Trustee Blakely.
Doesn't mean that they can't, but we would need to know that the expectation is that they're supposed to be there.
No.
Well, and what we talked about for this coming retreat next week didn't have anything to, I mean, it was more with how we work together. It wasn't those topics. I just had a kind of tangential question. At the moment, we only have one board meeting scheduled in February, but I think there was some discussion at one point about reserving a date for a possible additional meeting. Do we have any more clarity into the February calendar?
Right, that's when we were talking about scheduling sort of the second retreat to talk about the district/board goals and whatever format they might take. Given the presentation about our strategic plan timeline, I think we might need to revisit when the best timing for that meeting would be, Dr. Rudolph.
I would say, again, we plan on bringing back some items. I think it was in late March. I would have to look at the dates again, and so right after that, we would say, here's what we're thinking before we publish the final version, and we would get some feedback in there. So I think those items, that would be a natural time then to discuss it. Right now, everybody is sort of working on parallel tracks in terms of reopening, as well as strategic plan initiatives. And that involves all of our leadership team who are currently doing research on the various initiatives to meet the goals that were outlined by the board.
I think last year our study session that was sort of what the board retreat would have been ended up being in April because of all the things that were going on. So I think we're being a little flexible in our schedule given conditions. Trustee Chang.
Depending on when it happens, that second retreat where they talk about the goal setting, I think personally, I think that'd be a wonderful place to see about the mental health and SEL, and especially if it's before, just some way where it can get all that synergy with the strategic plan, which SEL is a critical pillar there. And I just, when that item comes back, I would welcome seeing it as a key part to our second retreat on goals.
I'm trying to figure out what that would look like, but I'm gonna process that.
Yeah. Just so that it ties in with what the district's already doing on SEL. I think that clearly there was a lot of interest in it when people put this as a future agenda item, and then clearly it's on our strategic pillar. So I'm just trying to figure out how we don't have parallel conversations on it, how we can make sure we're all working in the same direction at the same time.
I hear what you're saying, and I think it's a strategic pillar, but I think I personally appreciate separating them out so I can think about it at one and then come back to it and be more thoughtful at the next meeting. And normally I would envision the retreat being more just really focused on the plan and putting the plan together. That's not to diminish or belittle or sweep the second conversation aside. I just think that they're two different conversations.
There may be a time need of just from a student demand perspective of mental health issues in COVID-19 that put an urgency on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now it's wonderful that we've hired a health and wellness coordinator, but she is getting up to speed and trying to do the work. And so I don't have a firm date for that future presentation. If we can do it before our retreat, I think we should, right? Not the retreat next week, but before, whenever we have board goals. Otherwise, it's definitely something to have in mind and to think about. So thank you, Trustee Chang. And I've in preparation for our board retreat, which is on the 28th, I've been going through our bylaws and our governance structure for our school board. And I did clarify the bylaws for adding future agenda items were updated in 2015 to the structure that we currently use. So it's actually already in our bylaws, the bring it forth, have it seconded and voted on, get a majority, and then have it added as a future agenda item. So I wanted to let everybody know that that's one piece of work we don't have to add to our plate because it was already updated in 2015. All right. I think our last item is our future board meeting dates. We have our board retreat on the 28th. Does that need to be added to our list?
It doesn't, because it's a special board meeting.
It's a special meeting. It's not a regular meeting. Okay. Trustee Wheeler?
Yeah, so speaking of things that we recall talking about, for this meeting, I'm assuming part of that meeting is still going to be a short 3 to 5 minute report out about our, each of our CSBA
Yes.
workshops.
I just confirmed with Terrell, again, she sent over a draft agenda, which we discussed in depth, but the kind of what she's written out is doesn't include every single little thing that's going to be under each item, but I made sure that we have at least 20 to 25 minutes at the end of the meeting to talk about our CSBA learnings.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, I want to thank everyone for coming together early this evening at 5 p.m. I appreciate your willingness to do that. It looked like it was going to be a really meaty board meeting, but at 8:56 p.m., we will now officially adjourn this meeting of the Mountain View Wisdom School Board. Thank you, everyone.